This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Thank you for being with us across the nation, around the world. We're going to go to Paris here in moments. The turmoil in the Fifth Republic, the fifth government, I should say, of the Republic of France. We'll go to Korea. Richard Haass with us this morning as well. But Paul, on these equity markets, David Rosenberg joins us in the 9.
Yeah, exactly, Tom. I mean, S&P 500, Tom, I mean, we're 28% higher this year. It's just extraordinary. The question for a lot of folks is, okay, now where do we go?
When was the last time we went down? I mean, it's like 12 days ago.
Have we had a 10% correction in this market? I can't remember when.
Line it up year to date right now, with us coming into December, so it's almost a 1 year. Year to date, the Dow up 19%. SPX, as Paul mentions, up 28%. NASDAQ Composite up 31%. I believe the NASDAQ 100 doing better. Bloomberg Surveillance today across the nation. We're brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. Paul, I mean, we got to get Alicia Levine in. We got to get Jeffrey Yu in.
I know, we got to. Get
Great
some of these smart folks in there. Yeah, talking about this market here, Tom. I mean, we've got a Federal Reserve that looks like it's going to be cutting rates. I'm not sure to what degree.
You think so?
Well, we're going to get a cut maybe here in a couple of weeks, and then what do they do? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Andrew Ross Sorkin with that chat with Jerome Powell yesterday. I know David Gurrow was at that
They had some great
conference as well. Let's get right to it. A busy morning with many special guests. We'll get to Steve Carroll in Paris in a moment. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And across the board, records for Wall Street's three main indexes yesterday. This is after Fed Chief Jay Powell. He described the U.S. economy as in remarkably good shape. That was at a New York Times event. The Dow closed above 45,000 for the first time this morning. Not much movement. We have NASDAQ, Dow, and S&P futures all seeing little movement. Right now, we have the two-year yield, 4.14%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%, and that's up 1 basis point. French assets gain. Euro strengthening. Investors responding to the collapse of Michel Barnier's government. We have the CAC in Paris right now up about 0.2%, pointing to the euro. It's up about 0.2% at 105.37 against the dollar. Korean equities retreated. We have the Kospi now up down about 0.9%. The country's ruling party looking to prevent President Yoon Suk-Yeol's impeachment. As far as the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that is down about 0.1%. Bitcoin, here we go, blows past 100,000 now at 102,685. This is after President-elect Donald Trump's pro-crypto pick for SEC chief. Just want to check in quickly with a few other crypto-related stocks. We have Coinbase up 3%, Marathon Digital up 5%, and MicroStrategy up 6%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. This is what surveillance is about, folks. Stephen Englander will join us here in a bit. He's with Standard Chartered Bank. He's being patient to wait, and we'll start with him on the scope and scale of this crisis in France, what it means for the euro, and quite frankly, what it means for the U.S. dollar. First, though, we go to an authority. When France blew up here a couple days ago, it was an easy decision to send our Stephen Carroll, driving daybreak in Europe on Bloomberg Radio Worldwide, back to his Paris. He spent a decade at France 24. You ready? France 24.
Nice.
Nailed that. Joining us now from Paris, Mr. Carroll. Stephen Carroll, are we at risk of a sixth French Republic?
I mean, it's a good question. The far left party has been calling for one for quite some time. So if they manage to get their wish, they will have accomplished a major political goal of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, frequently described as a firebrand left-wing politician from the France Unbowed party. But look, this is a crisis of sorts, but it is contained because of the rules around how French politics works. The Prime Minister is gone. That in itself isn't that unusual. They're sort of the pressure release valve in French politics. But the way in which Michel Barnier was ousted hasn't happened since 1962. Emmanuel Macron is still president. No one can get rid of him. He's in office till 2027, unless he would choose to resign early. as a poll out this morning says 54% of French people want him to do.
Our friends in the Quan conversation with Marine Le Pen will be giving you a look at that, translated out of French, here in a moment. Stephen Carroll, what does it mean? I mean, this is a Paul Sweeney question. I'm stealing Paul's act. What's it mean for greater Europe? I mean, I got French yields trading through Greece. Are they a banana republic? I mean, is that what we're talking about? What's it mean for Europe?
Well, look, I mean, on the borrowing costs issue, obviously high borrowing costs, difficult for a country like France that has such large debt. So, I mean, in the immediate, it means that they're paying more on a year-to-year basis on the budget. That's, of course, if they had a budget for next year, which is one of the side effects of them no longer having a government. The benchmark going through the Greek yield certainly caused a lot of eyebrows to be raised, but France's 10-year borrowing cost is still 2.9%, so it's still pretty low. People are still able to get mortgages for around 3% here, so the immediate impact on borrowing costs isn't that dramatic. Also, it does appear that traders are taking this latest step in their stride. They pretty much priced it already. The spread over Germany is, of course, what we watch closely. But to your question about Europe, the interesting part here is that the engine of Europe, the Franco-German alliance, is at the moment stalled. There's, an election coming up in Germany as well. France is now in suspense with its politics too. That means that, there's a new European Commission that started on Sunday. They have a lot of plans about what they want to do, but realistically, you can't get anything done in Europe if France and Germany aren't on board. And if there's nobody that you can call in those capitals to get things done, that's going to make that job much more difficult as well.
Stephen, can you tell us, we're trying to understand here in the U.S. the difference between prime minister and president in France. What does this mean for President Macron? What can he effectively do for the remainder of his term?
It all depends really on how well he's able to select his next prime minister. That's the big question everyone here in France is asking. The president sets the direction of travel. He appoints the prime minister, essentially selects the ministers, although technically that's the job of the prime minister. But really the real power lies with the president here. I mean, in terms, if you were to look at it globally, the French president, in theory, has more power than the US president does over government as well. And that's something that's sort of increased as time has gone on. But the Prime Minister is the person that you need to get things done, to shepherd the Parliament, and this is a particularly fractured one, to try and get the measures and the laws actually passed through Parliament. So it really limits Emmanuel Macron's ability to implement really any of his agenda, and perhaps more worrying, it could see some of the reforms that he's done to try and modernise the French economy undone, depending on who ends up in any sort of coalition alliance that might be formed to try and get anything passed at the National Assembly. For the moment, of course, you can't have another set of elections until next summer. So whoever is taking over this job has to deal with the numbers that already exist, and they don't add up to much.
Stephen, pro tip. Off Rue Dauphine, just off the river, is Café Fernand, the best beef bourguignon I've ever had.
That's news you can use.
That's news you can use.
Yes.
That's a value add. Stephen Carroll, encyclopedic on his Paris. Thank you so much. Of course, Bloomberg Radio. Look for Bloomberg Daybreak. Patiently waiting is Stephen Englander of Standard Charter as well. Stephen, it is so far from a 116 euro down to a 104, from Duesenberg to Trichet to the technocrat Draghi to where Lagarde is now. How threatened is Europe by the French crisis?
I don't think there's an immediate threat. As the other Steve was saying, that the budget, they'll have some sort of budget, probably somewhat contractionary if it's fixed in nominal terms. I think the real issue is one, whether as this plays out in coming months and maybe second half of next year, we have elections, whether there's more of a move to the extremes,
right?
Whether the pressures that these kind of events represent mean that irrespective of European Brussels fiscal targets and so on, governments are going to feel compelled to spend more money.
Stephen, is it tradable? I mean, can you make a big figure bet here, a speculation, or actually a more longer-term bet on weak euro?
We think the euro is going to weaken over time. I mean, they just have a lot going against it. Obviously, the war in the Ukraine has sapped some of confidence. Structural policy really hasn't gone very far in terms of freeing up the economy. There's not much room on the fiscal side. The only game in town is lower rates from the ECB, and that's not going to help the euro strengthen.
So, Steve, is there, in your mind, in the next, 6 to 12 months, is there a credible bear case for the U.S. dollar, or do we just sit here with the greenback?
Well, look, the market's long dollars, right? Yeah. People have been buying dollars since, the beginning of October when Trump odds started going up. So, there's room for a setback. We think the market's too pessimistic on what the Fed's going to do. We think that they can cut, every meeting for the next 3 or 4 meetings if the numbers come in on the soft side. There is a case for a dip in the dollar because, if you look at the U.S. economy, effective monetary policy has been contractionary. Rates have gone up over the last 3 months. The dollar's gotten stronger. The economy may hit a bit of an air pocket, not a catastrophic one, but we could see softness at the beginning of next year, and that would hurt the dollar. But we think as the policies get put in place, they're likely to strengthen the dollar.
Steve, how about the Japanese yen? That's been in focus for a lot of folks. He's sitting here at 150 spot 33. What's your call there?
Well, we think it's going to strengthen over time. UEDA seems to be committed to raising rates. The inflation numbers seem relatively robust. And the real interest rates are very low. I think that they want to raise rates, and I think that they'll do it. And the market profile for Japanese rates is very, very flat. So the risk, I don't think there's much risk that they do less than the market. Right. And I think that there's risk that they do more, and that should be yen positive, especially if we're right on the Fed.
Stephen Englander, too short a visit. We had to go to Paris there, but please come on again soon for a much more careful look into 2025. Dr. Englander, of course, with Standard Chartered Bank. Paul, your observation on the last 48 hours, the news flow is overwhelming.
No, and we got geopolitical news coming out of France and South Korea. I mean, just extraordinary. I mean, martial law, I forgot about that was even a thing. And you don't see that very much these days, certainly not from developed economies. And then, of course, the local news here in New York City, which has been front and center with the United Healthcare executive. So a lot for everybody to kind of take in here. But the market's, steady as she goes. No real change here in the futures market here, Tom.
Yeah, again, it's not a bid to the market. I got a little bit of red on the screen, but there's just a bid.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say.
No, I mean, you think back in 2024, at 26, 27%. Yeah, exactly. Go to cash. I mean, if you're a portfolio manager and you're not overweight equities here, oh boy, you got to be in trouble talking to your shareholders at the end of the year.
10-year real yield, that's what I follow for the pros, 1.91%, nicely under 2% as well. Let us remember ADP yesterday. We'll get claims today at 8:30. Thank you, Commonwealth, for your support of our economics. And then we will get Jobs Day as well. This just came in. This is a red sticky on the Bloomberg.
Yep.
Duke beats Auburn.
Exactly. Number 2,
Auburn.
This
is not football. This is basketball.
This is basketball in Cameron Indoor Stadium last night. Great game between two good programs. So we needed that win.
We'll have complete coverage of this along with our Lions Packers. We're required to do that for Michael Barr. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit IBKR.com/forecast and get started today. All right, we've got futures pretty much treading water. This is after the S&P 500's 56th record close of 2024, and that's putting the index on course for its best year since 2019. Now, it came after Fed Chair Jay Powell told a crowd at the New York Times event that the downside risk from the labor market had receded. You also had the Fed's Mary Daly told PBS there's no sense of urgency to lower rates. But this morning, futures pretty much, treading water. We have the NASDAQ down about 6 points, Dow futures down about 2, S&P futures down about 1. The 2-year yield at 4.15%, that's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.19%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have oil right now, Brent crude at $72 a barrel, WTI crude at $68 a barrel. And this is after OPEC Plus delayed the revival of its oil production by 3 months. We go to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. The Korean won, want to point that out, down about 0.3% with political turmoil over in South Korea. Then you have the euro. It's up about 0.1%. This is ahead of an address by Emmanuel Macron, 2 p.m. Wall Street time. The president's looking for a new prime minister. And of course, have to point out Bitcoin at 102,862. To earnings we go. Shares of American Eagle Outfitters down 13%. The retailer cut its sales outlook. Then you have shares of PVH, that's the owner of Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger. They're down 6% after its holiday outlook fell short. And finally, on the flip side, shares of discount retailer Five Below up 14%. Yeah, reported surprise jump in same-store sales. Also, it announced a new CEO, Winnie Park, who used to run Forever 21. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Lisa Mateo, that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
What is Forever 21?
It's a discount clothing retailer. Sometimes I go there for good, cheap stuff.
I thought you guys go to TJX for that stuff, you and Alex.
A little mix of both. Well,
Okay.
TJX has the name brands. Forever 21 doesn't have the name brands.
Okay.
That's the difference.
I'm learning every day.
Every day.
Good morning, Barnes Corners, New York.
Yeah?
Just south of Watertown.
Okay.
44 miles is the crow flies from Oswego, New York.
Oh, sure.
65 inches of snow, and that's coming into today.
Knuckleheads.
It's right. It's like at
There's
the end
crazy
of
people
Lake
up there. I
Ontario,
know.
and there's a red arrow that says "Dump the snow here."
Yep, exactly. Every single year in December, they get dumped on. Unbelievable,
I
those
grew up
people.
with it. Barnes
God love
Corners, New York, 13626. Good
Go
morning to you. Welcome all of you across the nation here on economics, finance, investment, and buried with international relations. Richard Haass to join later. David Rosenberg in the 9 o'clock hour. We become smarter now, and this is a really important conversation with Aaron Dunn. He's out of the Arkansas-Texas Combine.
You know, so
Nobody
I asked
in the office
Aaron,
knows
like,
this.
what baseball team do folks in Arkansas root for? And I knew the answer before I asked it. St. Louis Cardinals. St. Louis Cardinals owns they own like
KMOX.
half the country.
Did you listen
Definitely.
to KMOX as a kid?
Ever see? It's amazing.
Ozzie Smith,
Yep.
Willie McGee.
Yeah,
those
I'm
guys,
in,
yeah.
I'm
It's
in
unbelievable.
St. Louis with Rachel.
KMOX.
I'm in St. Louis. They call me up and they go, "Can we interview you at KMOX?" There's like a plaque outdoor. Abraham Lincoln was here.
Sure.
And I literally had tears on my eyes
I know.
of the emotion of the Cardinals. There I am on KMOX. It's like, OMG, good morning across the Midwest. Aaron Dunn, enough of that. Value investing now, it's an era of growthiness. What does a value investor in Eaton Vance do?
It's actually interesting. If you look at this year, and something we came into thinking about this year, and it finally occurred, was a broadening of the equity markets, right?
Yes.
And that's definitely happened here in the back half of the year to the benefit of sectors like financials, utilities. They're at the top of the pile as well. So that's been a very good. I mean, you look at value, it hasn't kept up with the Mag 7, the big growth stock, but it's actually done quite well this year.
On value, and you've got this in your note, earnings forward obviously is everything. Do we generate revenues because we've got a better nominal GDP, better animal spirit, which makes it easy to hit that earnings hurdle rate?
That's the big question for 25 is you don't have a valuation really tailwind now, especially post-election. The market's up, 3, 4, 5%. So you have a lot of earnings growth that's projected for next year. that's the question. And really the makeup of that earnings growth is key. It's a lot of cyclical industries, right? So last year it was a lot of Mag 7, they're very weighted to the earnings growth of those companies. That's going to decline. Just the year-over-year base effect becomes lower. So cyclical earnings growth from sectors like energy and industrials, et cetera, are the ones that are really set to drive earnings growth next year. But that's also the risk, right? So we need that economic growth to be better next year, to accelerate, to hit those numbers, and I think for the market to work, essentially.
I understand there's a housing shortage in this country. We hear about it all the time. Mid-America Apartment Communities. Talk to us about that name.
Yeah, so Mid-America is a Sunbelt multifamily real estate company. For the last 18 months, you've had a lot of a big, I guess, pig in the python multifamily supply come on the market, right? So that's weighed on rent growth for a lot of these companies. That is ending, especially with rates where they are, right? So financing new construction obviously becomes more challenging. So you're going to get less supply over the next couple of years of multifamily. And as we all follow the new home market, I mean, they're trying to build, but we've underbuilt housing in this country. So there will be a big demand for multifamily still, especially we believe rates stay higher for longer, right? We're in the camp that inflation is stickier. So we think rates are higher. We're not surprised at all this year that we're sitting above 4% on the 10-year, for instance, and the Fed has been slower to cut rates, I think. And I think basically we set up for next year the same way we did this year, which is we're going to be talking about the Fed a lot next year, especially in the first half of the year.
I'm the ugly East Coast person. I wouldn't know Arkansas if it hit me over that. I tell it to French Hill all the time. So I'm in Fayetteville, and I get on 49 North to Little Rock. I had no idea Bentonville's right next door to Little Rock. I had no idea. How is Walmart a value stock with a PE of 30x? Explain this, oh wise one, who's lived it.
Great question. We don't own Walmart. So I'll be honest with you, we have the valuation hard to swallow here, frankly. But they've done a great job of taking share. It's actually interesting that Five Below, you had Dollar Tree report the other day. So the dollar stores were the ones ceding share. Walmart was picking it up, and they've done a great job of doing that. So with that, the stock's done very well. It's in a valuation that we don't find overly compelling currently.
Talk to us about the economy. I know you haven't been there. You're in Boston these days, but talk to us about the economy in Arkansas. What drives Arkansas these days?
It's a big farming community, obviously, right? In the southeast side of the state, it's Mississippi Delta, so there's a lot of rice. It's a big exporter of rice. But you also have actually a lot of businesses in Arkansas that are you would recognize: Walmart, Tyson Chicken, a lot of trucking companies. So there's a lot of companies that actually reside up in the northwest corner in Fayetteville, Bentonville that are big brand names that people I think would not expect.
How did you keep your southern accent in Boston? I mean, that's like from Cranston.
They beat that out of you.
Rhode Island. It's like wicked. How did you do that? If you just like you wake up every day
I went through Texas first, then I made it up to.
Do your kids
to
understand you?
No. I'm trying to convey that to my children. It's not working quite as well. So.
Don't be a stranger. Way too short a conversation. Aaron Dunn with us.
New York stuff.
I'm telling you, folks, this is the conversation.
Another Eaton Vance guy.
Oh,
These guys are everywhere.
Dose Gardner did it. I mean, he nailed it at Eaton Vance. They did all sorts of good things. And
Morgan Stanley,
Morgan Stanley picked it up and ran with it.
Acquisitions has Morgan Stanley made on the asset management side?
It's been better than
really
good.
Better than good.
Better than good, to say the least. This is something we're going to have Aaron Dunn back in January if he comes to New York. And the basic idea here, folks, is this great bull market, whether you're on board, sort of on board, or like me, you've missed it big time. This is our theme into next year, this great bull market. And to speak to Mr. Dunn of Eaton Vance about what we see in value versus Mag 7, you heard him say he doesn't own Walmart. Those are the kind of conversations we're going to have forward. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to YouTube podcasts. It's just simple. Bloomberg. Go to YouTube and subscribe to Bloomberg podcasts. And there we are, growing every day. They got all sorts of metrics. I still don't understand them.
No, but the powers that be, they understand them. They just tell us we're doing well or not doing well. We figure it out.
They say, this is, it's too much information, Tom. I'm like, right. On your commute across America, good morning on Sirius XM, Channel 121, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. In the next hour, Richard Haass. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Another banner day on Wall Street. Fresh record closing highs for all the major averages. The Dow closed above the 45,000 mark for the first time. This morning, futures pretty much treading water. We have NASDAQ futures down about 14 points. Dow futures down 12. S&P futures down about 3. The two-year yield, 4.16%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.21%, and that's up 3 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Korean won down about 0.3%. Japanese yen, little change. The euro stronger, up 0.1% at 105.29 against the dollar. British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up 5% at more than 102,000. Shares of Southwest Airline, they're up nearly 2%. The carrier says there's been a resilient travel demand. Now, because of that, it raised its estimates for unit revenue in the fourth quarter. We go to Dollar General. It narrowed its full-year guidance, showing its challenges in attracting those bargain-hunting shoppers. But shares are up about 2%. We're also rating results from Kroger. After the bell, it's on to Victoria's Secret, Ulta Beauty, Hewlett-Packard, and Petco. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. For those of you across the nation, the Tri-City area, Tri-State area rather, is transfixed by a crime. With an update on this murder in New York City, our John Tucker.
Yeah, this is the murder of CEO Brian Thompson of United Healthcare. But I want to start off just telling the rest of the country, the cop shows that you see on TV, they do nothing. They don't do justice to the real thing, because the NYPD chief of detectives, Joe Kenny, came out yesterday, steps right out of central casting.
The shooter steps onto the sidewalk from behind the car. He ignores numerous other pedestrians, approaches the victim from behind, and shoots him in the back. The shooter then walks toward the victim and continues to shoot. It appears that the gun malfunctions as he clears the jam and begins to fire again. The shooter then flees on foot northbound into an alleyway between 54th Street and 55th Street.
Now, Midtown Manhattan, Paul and Tom, is the last place on the planet Earth you would want to carry out this type of shooting.
Especially this time of year, John.
This time of year, and there are surveillance cameras everywhere, and a good detective, even though the shooter is masked at the time, can sort of piece together somebody's description based on their body movements, their build. So that's what they're working on right now. The shooter went into Central Park, where there are many fewer surveillance cameras, to try to escape. And one of the distinctive things about him was that weird backpack that he was carrying. So it really set him apart. So this is an individual I think they're going to be able to track pretty easily from the surveillance video. As for the motive, the New York Post was reporting, their police sources, that on the bullet casings, the live casings and the spent casings on the street outside the Hilton were inscriptions, one of which read "denied." So that is part of the possible motive.
We'll continue with this. John Tucker reporting through this morning. We've decided to really have John sit on this story instead of trying to collate in innuendo and speculation and all that. John Tucker with the news of this terrible shooting. Again, read on the screen today, we're into jobs report tomorrow. It's like jobs report. It's like
kind of snuck up on you.
Well, with the news flow.
Yeah.
Has been extraordinary. Right now, with a window into your Washington, Professor Schiller joins from Brown University. Wendy, I look at the zeitgeist out of Washington, and it seems like a Senate ascendant, a Senate trying to find their place within this era of executive power. Do you sense that the Senate is gaining traction in what they want to do in this new mix?
Well, I think, Tom and Paul, good morning, and Lisa, and John again. I think that it really makes you think about the majorities. So 53-47 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's just enough to give John Thune, who's the Republican leader, who'll be the Republican leader after January 3rd, enough room, Tom, to sort of negotiate with Trump on one side and a fractious Senate Republican Party on the other. And that's the difference that a 51-49 versus 53-47 makes. And the House, I don't know if they're going to be able to do anything, which is of concern because constitutionally they do generate They are the originators of tax and trade bills. So this makes you nervous that the majority could, on a bad day for Republicans, not exist in the House. So all eyes on John Thune right now.
Professor Schiller, I think so important here to those of us not expert is what are the consequences? So Murkowski and Collins of Maine, they're in the Trump timeout chair. I get that. Collins Appropriations Committee chairman to be, I believe. What are the consequences to a given senator who joins Murkowski and Collins pushing against the president-elect? Are they not invited to the Christmas party? I mean, what are the consequences?
Tom, it's primary challenges. I mean, Trump is riding probably the highest level of approval he's ever had. And I think now's in a position where he can say, I'm going to anoint this person to run against you. Joni Ernst in Iowa. That's what I'm looking at, particularly on the Hegseth nomination, because she's up in 26 in Iowa. And, you know, she had a sort of closer race last time, but I think, you know, she's probably expected to win pretty easily if Trump doesn't find somebody else to run against her in the primary. So I think that's what these senators are worried about. But if 3 Republican women come out and say they can't vote for Hegseth, then I don't think it survives. So I think this is where it's important to have the numbers in each of these cabinet nominations in terms of objecting to what Trump wants.
So to what extent, I guess, Professor, do you think the Senate will challenge or put up some roadblocks for some of the more contentious nominees here, Mr. Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and some others?
Well, Paul, I mean, I don't think they're in a position to really put up big roadblocks. I think they're just trying to stay on the road right now with Donald Trump and not get run off the road, and so that they can actually exercise their constitutional responsibility to even have confirmation hearings. It looks like they're getting through to that, which was in doubt like 2 weeks ago. But now it looks like they've said, look, we'll get it done, but give us our space to do this. And it looks like Thune is preserving that power, which strengthens Thune internally in the Senate. So how much will Trump let, or Trump's advisors let Thune be that strong? We're about to see that in the next couple of weeks.
What are you observing here on the summation of the attorney of Matt Gaetz over to FBI? I have found as the amateur here, Professor Schiller, that the heat, the level against the FBI designate is just extraordinary. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge moment in American, law enforcement history, right? I wasn't alive to know J. Edgar Hoover, right? Guy ran FBI for, I think, at least 50 years or something. And he really, one could say, abused the power of the FBI. So it's taken a long time for the FBI to come back from that. And under Chris Wray, I think it's been restored a little bit. But this is, fiercely in the MAGA community, an anti-federal law enforcement ethos. So this is what Trump is playing to. And Trump himself probably does not have any love for the FBI. But the FBI does incredibly important work, particularly on terrorism, domestic and international, and other things. So I think the Senate wants to make sure there's a functioning FBI. So that's where this is a moment in time and history for federal law enforcement. And it could be severely weakened and undermined. I don't think that's what most senators want.
Professor, the first 100 days of any incoming administration are absolutely critical. What do you expect this administration to really focus on the first 100 days?
Typically, Paul, I would agree with you. I'd say 100 days really matters to Donald Trump. One thing, it's his second term, not his first. So I don't know that it's that crucial, this 100-day marker. It's also Donald Trump, and the power he wields among his voters, his supporters, is something we haven't seen in a long time in terms of reverse pressure on Congress. So I think that power lasts, for a while, well beyond 100 days, as long as the economy keeps looking like it's getting better and inflation stays stable. If the economy does not stay stable and inflation does tick up, then I think that popular support for Trump erodes and his clout with Congress erodes in a proportion to that.
So what are the next mileposts that we need to be focused on, Professor, here between now and Inauguration Day for President-elect Trump and his administration?
I think reaction to his nominees is very important. I think that he's making more foreign trips. This was a guy who didn't really like to cross the pond. Now he's going to France to go to Notre Dame for its opening. He seems like he now wants to be, forgiven, so to speak, or accepted into the international club. And I think we're going to see some developments, even though he's not even president yet, on foreign policy. He's going to want to be the guy that solves Russia-Ukraine and solves the Middle East, because what's left to do? And he can show up Biden in that respect. So I do think you're going to see a bigger shift, a bigger set of attentions paid to foreign policy for Trump, and starting now with some of these international trips.
Wendy Schiller, thank you so much. We've got breaking news again to go to. Professor Schiller with Brown University on the drama in the Senate going forward here into the end of the year. Just very quickly here, Paul, on TD Bancorp, Toronto Dominion Bank, they suspend guidance.
Yeah, they do. So their TD Bank fourth quarter adjusted EPS misses estimates, and they suspend their targets. And that's what really spooks investors when you get a company who does put out forecasts and then at some point pulls it back. The stock's kind of flat though on the day, but it's down 7% year to date. So there's been concerns about the Canadian banks.
One headline: will be challenging to generate earnings growth in 2025. That from TD. Toronto Dominion is what I'm going to call them. I don't care if they're TD or that. They're Toronto Dominion always. Great Maple Leaf tickets as well. Futures -2 with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. South Korean President Yoon Suk-Yeol has replaced his defense minister as opposition parties move to impeach both men over the brief imposition of martial law that brought armed troops into Seoul streets. President Yoon replaced Defense Minister Kim Jong-Un with a retired general who is currently ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Marine Le Pen's far-right party teamed up with a left-wing coalition to topple the French government, leading to a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Michel Barnier. The suspected gunman in a school shooting in Butte County, California, is dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound, according to authorities. The suspect shot 2 boys who were students at the Feather River Adventist School, ages 5 and 6. Sheriff Corey Honey.
They are currently in extremely critical condition, and they're being treated by the medical staff. I'm thankful that they are still alive, but they have a long road ahead of them.
Sheriff Honey says the suspected shooter was at the school for a meeting with an administrator. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are meeting with House Republicans later today to talk about their strategy for slashing government. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
House Speaker Mike Johnson announced last week he will host the pair to, quote, revive the principle of limited government. President-elect Donald Trump picked Musk and Ramaswamy to lead the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short. They're seen as outside government advisors to find places to make drastic cuts in government. They do face some legal and logistical hurdles, but a new congressional subcommittee chaired by Georgia Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene could help, as it aims to eliminate government waste. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
And Michael, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning into Jobs Day. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by the Jewish Communal Fund, JCF. Helps you respond to crisis swiftly. Open your JCF, a donor-advised fund now to secure your tax deduction. Visit jcfny.org. You can call them. Here's the number, 212-752-8277. We thank the Jewish Communal Fund for their support of what we do. Paul, the news, I'm looking at Toronto Dominion here. And I mean, when you're a bank and you suspend your medium-term target, like what's the backstory?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting here. I mean, this is a big bank. I forgot how big Toronto Dominion is. $139 billion in market cap. So it's the thing about the Canadian banking business is really the mortgage markets. It's such a big part of the Canadian household net worth is tied to their real estate. It's a much higher percentage than it is in the U.S. And I also learned recently, in the last several years, they don't do 30-year mortgages there. It's very short term. So they bear some more interest rate risk up there.
On the edge of Europe. Yep. Somebody says we're going to make Canada the 51st state. I don't know about
the
Montreal Canadiens have to get better before we do that. Yeah. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. We're out on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Please subscribe to YouTube Bloomberg Podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, little movement right now. We have NASDAQ futures down about 9 points, Dow futures down 3, S&P futures down about 1. We have the 2-year yield at 4.15%, up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.21%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.1%, $72 a barrel. WTI crude $68 a barrel, and that's after OPEC Plus delayed the revival of its oil production by 3 months. To currencies, the Bloomberg dollar spot index, little change. The Korean won down about 0.3%. We have the euro, that's up about 0.2%. Looking over at the British pound, that's up about 0.1%. Bitcoin up 5% at more than 103,000. Apple partner Foxconn, they reported a second consecutive month single-digit sales growth, and that's kind of raising concerns that demand for AI infrastructure, well, it won't be able to offset weak iPhone sales. And a sign, TikTok still going strong despite a potential ban. Its U.S. shopping sales on TikTok Shop, will it triple to over $100 million on Black Friday. And Disney, it boosted its annual dividend by 33%. It comes after the company showed last month that its streaming business Studio gained some traction. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I'm yawning over here. I got to wake up here. Paul, help me here quickly.
Sure.
Is there legs to a movie anymore? Like if there's Thanksgiving weekend, the next weekend is like really important?
Well, I mean, typically they decline by about 40 to 50%. That's typical, you know. And the question is, how do they play in weeks 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, out, 10, 15, 20 weeks? Not as strong as it used to be. Because I know I got the streaming option right at the back end.
Okay, yeah, but the Gura household, I mean, they go to Moana. They had to mortgage the middle child.
Exactly.
They go to Moana. The kids go to school and they go, oh, it was awesome. So the next weekend, the cherubs didn't
sure. Yeah, it still happens.
We go to Moana too.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really what's going to happen,
I think it does. It does. And so we've had a great Thanksgiving movie theater going into Christmas.
We'll have to see. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front page is the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, they focus on the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. Lisa?
Oh, Tom, I know you love your bow ties, but this story stood out to me because of you. The necktie making an office comeback. This was in the Wall Street Journal. Yes. This is a place where you see the dress sneakers.
Yes.
Paul always talks about. Everybody's wearing
Even
sneakers.
Even David Weston went to the dress
sneakers.
That just crushed me.
Yes. But who is wearing the necktie? So apparently, it's the 20-something crowd. Like a lot of the interns are coming in. They want to make an impression. They say it helps show their personality, gives them confidence. But women also getting in on the action.
Nope.
It commands a room. That's what they say. It starts a conversation. It's becoming like the hot accessory, like shoes or jewelry. So now the women have neckties. But some saying that sometimes they're more decked out than the boss is. The boss comes in, dressed cash and the sneakers and everything.
Bow ties?
And not bow ties, neckties. No. The actual long necktie.
I haven't worn one since time began. We just had a meeting, and we're dressed to the nines, and the guy walks in, and he's like San Francisco cash.
Yeah.
And this is dead on, that there's like bouncing cultures going on.
It's all started with the dot-com boom in the late 90s. That's when I sensed it.
Yes.
And for a couple of years, I did go casual. But then,
did you?
Then the market crashed in 2000. And let's get back to work now.
You go cash here when you're working a 3-day week in the summer.
Yep.
You're wearing Dior.
Of course.
You're wearing Montclair.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, the pandemic kind of sparked that like cash thing too, because of work from home, and then some people slowly transitioned to dressing nicer. But
my clothes icon, Damien Sassauer.
Oh.
Everything he wears, I'm taking.
Patagonia.
Next.
Okay, Taylor Swift. Remember the concert book that came out in Target on Black Friday? Well, apparently it did really well. Circana Bookscan said it sold 814,000 copies the first 2 days. The only one to beat it is actually former President Barack Obama's A Promised Land. But think about it. His book was sold at all major retailers. Swift's only exclusively at Target. So just at Target alone, she sold that many. But the Wall Street Journal also points to experts who say artists really need to take out a page out of that book, because when it comes to concerts, they need to follow the success story that she's done. Like, she's popularized a long concert. I mean, hers are 3 hours, 15 minutes plus.
What's the shortest Bruce concert you've ever been to?
Oh my God. Yeah, again,
3.5
hours.
It does go that long.
Don't give me the
and he's
she invented
73.
that.
Yeah.
You know, did you say the statistic was 800,000?
814,000 copies.
When Alexander Hamilton came out, Ron Chernow, I interviewed him, the great Ron Chernow. Yep. He single-handedly changed the publishing business when he sold over 300,000 hardcovers of Alexander Hamilton. So think about that. He changed the business with 300,000 plus. And here's Swift doing 800,000.
Everything she touches.
I'm telling you.
Gold.
But also the things she does, like for the concerts, to get people. Like they say, artists need to think, attract more women, because you had the mothers and the daughters who attended together.
No.
You had the DIY bracelets. That's another thing. Yeah. Mini residencies. You know how she does the longer stays? That's like another big thing. That
Surveillance note, we remember our key interview, foundational interview with Amy Wu Silverman.
Yes.
Her daughter, Taylor, waved at them.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just bought tickets.
Moment.
I just bought tickets for the Eagles at the Sphere in Vegas for April.
Ooh.
How about that?
Nice.
That was an impulse purchase that I sometimes regret.
Impulse
purchase.
Yes, that may have been done in the evening after a couple of cocktails.
This is not off Redo, keeper of the Amex.
No,
right?
this is not Redo's not paying
very
for this.
cool. Vince Gill's out with him now.
Yeah, is that
very,
right?
yeah,
Okay,
Vince
cool.
Gill's
Very
out
good.
with him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
There's some real history there.
Well, after a few cocktails, I purchased Zach Bryan country tickets for my daughter.
There you go.
At MSG. I regret that kind of now. But anyway, they cost me a lot.
The cocktails are dangerous.
Yes, they are.
It's all about the experiences now, Lisa. It's not about goods and services. It's about the
I
experiences.
know.
That's
She's
what
picking out her country outfits already.
Right.
Next, we got Business Insider. They had this report on how important influencers, those affiliate marketers, have become for Cyber Monday.
Yeah, like John Tucker.
No, not exactly, but Adobe Analytics say they drove about 20% of U.S. Cyber Monday revenue. How they do it, they post these affiliate links. That's how they make their money, because that link is linked to their, and that's how, depending on the commission they make, that's what it goes by. So they're saying a lot more people click on the links than just regular posts. So they're saying these affiliate marketers are the ones that are really starting to push these online sales, especially through social media.
Well,
they're making
I'm from
money
the time
doing
you just
it.
bought a 30-second spot on radio or TV, and that's how you.
Nope. Now
Influencers
these
now.
big
All right.
companies are going
Tom
to the
could be
influencers.
an influencer. Tom could be an
He
influencer,
could.
I think.
We can make that happen.
Yeah.
I don't,
Tang.
Go to your
how
favorite
much is the
cognac and-
commission?
You could be sponsored by Tang.
Yes.
Finally, there's been a change. Cognac champagne makers, they're looking to boost their U.S. exports ahead of Trump's been talking about tariffs
Get out
for
front of
different
the
countries.
tariffs, yeah.
Yes. I mean, France has not been part of that, but you have companies like LVMH cognac brand Hennessy. Sources saying they're increasing consignments to the U.S. following Trump's victory. They want to do the same with Moet champagne. But about 27 million champagne bottles were shipped to the U.S. last year. So now they're saying that you're starting to see a shift, and companies are going to likely redirect those bottles, even that would have gone to China. So there might be a shift.
She's such a hitter.
Yep.
Do you see how she pronounces Moet correctly?
Moet.
It's not Moet.
I would have gone Moet.
It's Moet.
I don't know.
It's because they're from Eastern France and they pronounce like accents.
Oh, is that right?
See?
It's like, they regional accents.
I thought it was a Brooklyn thing.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
It was Lisa, thank you so much. Lisa Mateo with our newspapers. We do it each and every day. And thank you to I got it, Oppenheimer.
Yep.
Thank you to Oppenheimer for helping out today. Adele, Rolling in the Deep. We're doing some Tom Elmhurst music today. Mr. Elmhurst makes records. Good morning.
We could have had it all. We could have had it all. It all.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. A very busy hour. We're going to go to Paris here in moments. Our Stephen Carroll and the collapse of part of the French Republic. Richard Haass will join us, Ambassador Haass on Korea. We'll do that here in a moment. Red and green on the screen here. In this hour, we get jobless claims, important economic data into the jobs report tomorrow. Right now, in the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we had across-the-board records for Wall Street's three main indexes yesterday. This was after Fed Chief Jay Powell described the U.S. economy as in remarkably good shape. He made those comments at a New York Times event. The Dow closed above 45,000 for the first time. Dow futures above 45,000 right now. Shares are a little changed. They are down about 20 points. We have NASDAQ futures down about 4, S&P futures down about 1. The 2-year yield, 4.16%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.21%, and that's up 3 basis points. French assets, they gain. The euro strengthening. Investors responding to the collapse of Michel Barnier's government. You have the CAC in Paris up about 0.1%. We go to Korean equities, retreating. The Kospi right now down about 0.9%. The country's ruling party looking to prevent President Yoon Suk-Yeol's impeachment. Over to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Korean won down about 0.3%, and we have the euro up about 0.2%. Bitcoin right now at 103,107. This was after President-elect Donald Trump's pro-crypto pick for SEC chief. Speaking of which, other crypto-related stocks, you have Coinbase up 4%, Marathon Digital up 5%. And finally, Toronto Dominion Bank, TD Bank missed estimates, weak performance in the lender's U.S. banking operations. It also said it's suspending its growth guidance. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. There is a difference between us and them. And it's not that, they smoke chatons at cafes and all the stereotypes of France. It is about fiscal policy. Joining us now in Paris, Stephen Carroll, of course, a decade with France 24. We're thrilled that he leads our coverage of Bloomberg Daybreak in London. He is in Paris this morning. Stephen Carroll, Eleanor Mavridi of Bloomberg Economics has a brilliant essay out this morning on French austerity. We don't know what that is in America. The Republicans spend, the Democrats spend. Is this just really about France wants to be like Germany and have an austere policy?
I think it's closer that France wants to make sure they don't spook the bond markets and end up with more parallels being drawn to Liz Truss's brief premiership in the UK when bond markets were spooked about spending plans coming from the former Prime Minister and her Finance Minister. So, I mean, the question, and this was the big task that Michel Barnier had been set when he took on the Prime Ministership here in France, was to get the finances in order. All Eurozone countries are subject to the same rules in terms of how big their budget deficit can be. Now, you can argue that nobody really obeys those rules, but they at least have to pretend to. And this is part of the issue, is that the trajectory for France's budget deficit was too high. Michel Barnier's plan to bring it down ever so slowly would have been 5% of GDP next year anyway. That would have satisfied the EU. Now the question is, without that budget, we're expecting the deficit to be much larger because there's a whole load of tax and spending measures that won't come into force now on the 1st of January. What's that going to mean if you're sitting in Brussels and saying, we've already warned you, France, that your budget deficit is bigger than it should be, and we've told you to get your house in order, and now you don't seem to be able to do that? Not likely that we got too much of a reprisal from Brussels, but it's certainly going to make for frosty relationships if you're on that train between Paris and Brussels.
What's the timing here going forward? How should we think about the next few days?
Well, look, I mean, Emmanuel Macron has a busy hosting agenda at the Élysée Palace today. He's already seen Michel Barnier this morning. Michel Barnier, of course, was legally obliged to present the resignation of his government after losing yesterday's no-confidence vote. Emmanuel Macron's seeing a parade, it would appear, of political leaders. He's already met the head of the National Assembly. He's meeting the head of the Senate shortly, trying to presumably work out with them who might be able to lead a government that can work, someone who can succeed where Michel Barnier had failed. This is all counting down to Emmanuel Macron's address to the nation this evening at 8 o'clock local time, too, in the U.S.
Interesting. 2 o'clock in the U.S. Stephen Carroll, thank you so much from Paris. We'll look for that. Of course, our afternoon work, balance of power in all. Yep. Carol and Tim will have the Macron speech for you and the details, what it means into the markets here. Joining us right now, thrilled, not really honored that we could have him today, is someone with a global perspective. His initial acclaim with the Bush Senior administration on Northern Ireland. Richard Haass, of course, I'm going to say really the reinvigoration of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is with Centerview. Ambassador Haass, thank you for joining us. I think we forget that Seoul, Korea is 35 miles from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. How does the tension of North Korea and South Korea fold into the shock of government collapse and test in Seoul?
Good question, Tom. Good morning. I think the issue is whether North Korea, which is obviously watching what's going on in South Korea with, say, more than a little interest, whether they see this as a moment of some opportunity. This is, North Korea remains the most militarized country in the world. You've got two large conventional armies arrayed against each other. You still have more than 20,000 American troops there. North Korea obviously also has a missile and a growing nuclear force. So that's the danger here, that they would see this as some a moment of opportunity to exploit. And I would expect and hope that South Korean and U.S. forces would be at a higher level of alert just to try to deter any such thing.
June of 2019, President Trump meets Kim Jong-Un. We all remember that moment. What if that happens again? What is a signal to South Korea if the president-elect reduxes June of 2019?
Look, the South Korean relationship with President Donald Trump was one of the worst relations between an American ally and the United States. The president really pushed hard about why wasn't South Korea doing more to pay for U.S. troops there, concerns about the trade imbalance and so forth. So much, and by the way, and threatened to pull U.S. forces out of South Korea. So if he were to once again ratchet up the pressure, I think the most likely reaction would be that South Korea would think very seriously indeed about developing nuclear weapons of its own if it came to lose faith in the United States. And that's the sort of thing that, among other things, could cause a real crisis with China. So there's a lot of potential dynamics here.
Richard, how concerned should the average American be, or the average just observer in the West be, about South Korea? This martial law news over the last couple of days really caught, I think, everybody by surprise. How concerned should we be about the stability of that part of the world?
It did catch everybody by surprise, including everybody in South Korea. The good news is it went nowhere. You had the declaration of martial law. The National Assembly met almost immediately, repudiated, public opinion repudiated it. The president backed down very quickly. So to me, the larger story is a good one about the resilience of South Korean democracy and institutions some 40 plus years since South Korea joined the ranks of the democracy. So I don't think we should be concerned. I actually think the big loser here is President Yoon, and he'll obviously face now an impeachment challenge. And I'm not sure if he survives what he set in motion. He was unpopular before this. He's far more unpopular now.
Right.
He's lost a lot of legitimacy. But I actually think it's a good day for South Korean democracy.
It is not a quiet December. We welcome all of you across the nation. Your morning commute, Bloomberg surveillance. Too much international relations, it seems. We're focused on Paris and, of course, on what we see in Seoul. And with us, Richard Haass. Coming up, Audrey Child-Friedman and the currency markets, and we're looking forward to economic data here in 20 minutes. Paul?
Richard, let's move over to what we're seeing in Ukraine here. Boy, there's so many dynamics here, so many ebbs and flows here with the incoming U.S. administration here. How do you think this is going to play out over the coming months in Ukraine?
Actually, uncharacteristically, and I hope you're all sitting down there, upbeat. I actually think over 2025, while the battlefield will continue, I think attention's going to move to the negotiating table. The person Donald Trump has appointed, Keith Kellogg, retired Army general. He was Mike Pence's national security advisor, but he's been appointed to be the point man for Ukraine and Russia. What he's recently written about the subject, I find incredibly sensible. Essentially, first going to Ukraine, saying we'll continue to provide arms, but you've got to be willing to negotiate in good faith and base the negotiation pretty much on a ceasefire in place. And I think the Ukraine government has come around to that, if you listen to what Mr. Zelensky's saying. And then the question is whether they can bring Russia around. But to me, it's all good news. There's a focus on negotiations. No one's talking about throwing Ukraine under the bus. And very quickly, I think the pressure is going to be on Vladimir Putin to meet Ukraine halfway. So I don't think it's crazy optimistic to say in 2025, by the end of that year, say a year from now, we could be seeing real progress diplomatically. I'm actually optimistic about it.
Richard, how do you think, how would you characterize the relationship today with President-elect Trump and Putin? Is it going to be constructive? Can we move the ball forward on a number of issues? What's that relationship like?
It's the right question. The atmospherics have often been good. The substance, who knows? Look, you've got Ukraine. That'll be probably the first early test. We'll see if Mr. Trump can persuade Putin to dial down his relationship with North Korea. That'll be a second test. A year after Donald Trump resumes his presidency, goes and re-enters the Oval Office, the New START arms control framework is set to expire. So we're going to learn there as well. Can the Trump administration and Putin, can they extend the nuclear arms agreements that have been so central to international stability? So there's any number of issues. So I'm not in the predictions business, and I don't think there's any way of knowing. But we're going to have some pretty early indications, beginning with Ukraine.
Richard Haass, I look at your work with the Council on Foreign Relations and your ability to write prodigiously about this. Let us stop and go back to really an important work. Foreign policy begins at home. How are we doing, Richard Haass? How are we doing in building out our domestic structure to project internationally?
If I were still a professor, I'd give us a pretty low grade. I'm not sure I'd give us a passing grade. We're extraordinarily divided, which makes it increasingly difficult to be consistent and reliable, either for our friends or against our foes. We're also been unsuccessful at tackling many of our domestic challenges. Just take two. One is the border situation. And if people in this country see real problems here at home, they don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the focus on the rest of the world. The other something you talk a lot about on your program here, which is the deficit and debt. And again, we'll see whether we have the collective will to tackle that. It's interesting, the numbers that have brought down the French government, running a deficit to GDP ratio of about 6% or so. Guess what? That's where we are. And our cumulative debt is essentially now what? Equal to our GDP. Yeah. So we're in serious water. So I think there's real issues about our focus, our political consensus, and also just the resource availability for the United States to play the kind of role in the world that we have for 80 years now, and that I would argue has served us in the world pretty well.
You were a young lad at Obermann. There's a photo out of Paul Sweeney of Barnier. I think he couldn't shave, he was so young, in Pompidou, which harkens back to, folks, 1962 and the collapse of another French government. Richard Haass, a question I asked our Stephen Carroll earlier, should we get ready for a sixth French Republic?
Good question, but the problems to me aren't so much mechanical, Tom, as political. So you have the left and the right voting down the prime minister. And all this comes against the backdrop of, I think, Macron mishandling French politics, calling for snap elections when they are unlikely to result in anything good. But the real question is, what is the left and the right willing to vote for? So the issue is not just Barnier. The issue is not mechanical like it was with the Fourth Republic. The real question to me is do you have a consensus in France to take some difficult decisions about spending, taxation, and the rest? Sounds familiar, I expect. And I don't think that can be fixed mechanically with rewriting the rules of French politics, and you couldn't rewrite the rules in any case quickly enough or get approval of them. There's no figure like a de Gaulle who could ram it through the French political system. So I think we're pretty much stuck with the Fifth Republic.
Thank you so much for the time. Richard Haass, of course, with Centerview Partners. Can't say enough about his work with the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Affairs magazine as well. Futures at -3. Paul, are we going to go down today because of the jobs report in 14 minutes?
Exactly. I can't imagine.
Finally, do we?
I don't know.
A correction?
Yes, we haven't had one for a long time, Tom.
I mean, now we're looking for, I guess, a 5% correction is ginormous. We're nowhere near that. Let's look at equities, bonds, currencies, commodities from the Interactive Brokers Studios. Our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we got futures pretty much treading water. This is after S&P's 556 record close of 2024, and that put the index on course for its best year since 2019. The levels higher, but this morning, little movement. So we have NASDAQ futures down about 12 points at 21,523. Dow futures down about 38 points at 45,067. S&P futures down 3 points at 6,095. We have the two-year yield 4.15%, up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.21%, and that's up about 2 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude $72 a barrel, WTI crude $68 a barrel. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.1%. The Korean won, that's down 0.3%. You have the political turmoil in South Korea. The euro, right now it's up about 0.3%, and that's at 105.48 against the dollar. That's ahead of the address by Emmanuel Macron, 2 p.m. Wall Street time. And finally, Bitcoin 103,000 above that mark. Shares of American Eagle, they're down 12%. The retailer cut its sales outlook. We go to the flip side, discount retailer Five Below, they're up 14%. Reported a surprise jump in same-store sales last quarter, also announced a new CEO. But discount retailer Dollar General, it narrowed its full-year guidance, but it doesn't seem to have investors too concerned. Its shares are up about 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. There are moments off camera, off microphone, that are seared in my memories of doing this. One of them, I'm sitting with Christine Lagarde.
Nice.
And she's explaining to me, lecturing me in her own quiet, lovely way, that protest in France is different. And, Tom, Tom, you dumb American. They protest differently over there. We're going to speak of foreign exchange with Audrey Child-Freeman, but she's so definitive on her France that we thought a few questions here first on the tumult that we see in France. Audrey, there's a legacy in France of protesting differently. What is the protest that brings the left and the right together within, to be polite, a 5-party parliamentary system?
Well, at the moment, it sounds like it's a common interest, I would say, in wanting to reject the budget that was proposed by Michel Barnier, and that was perceived as too austere and against the principle of both the right and the left, the far right, I should say, and the left.
I look, Audrey, at your work on foreign exchange, and it's just simple. It's the money question of resilient dollars, strong dollar. You link that directly to Fed policy, don't you?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the main driver for foreign exchange continues to be yield differential, the carry trade, and that's a function of primarily of Fed expectations, and that's itself is a question of what happens to the U.S. economy and what happens to U.S. inflationary prospects. So at the moment, we are getting a lot of noise in Europe, and certainly it's negative. It's if you're Euro bear, you just have another box ticked. But for me, what's going to be more relevant into, what happens to the euro dollar next year is, what happens to the U.S. economy. And for the time, for as long as the situation in France doesn't become or isn't perceived as a euro existential risk, I think if you believe in more euro downside, the best bet you have is to get more strength in the U.S. economy as we get into 2025.
So is parity for the euro, is that something that investors should prepare for? Is that possible or likely?
Well, given, think about how much bad news we've had for euro in terms of, euro-specific bad news. I'm not talking just about European politics. I'm also talking about the fact that throughout 2024, we spent the whole year expecting the Eurozone economy to gain momentum. It hasn't happened. We've had an underwhelming economy at a time when we were pricing in and expecting an economy to actually gain some momentum. At the same time that was happening, when the US economy, we were all chasing the US economy lower in the market, expecting the US to start to weaken and the Fed to be potentially more aggressive in terms of rate cuts. And yet again, that hasn't really happened. We've had rate cuts from the Fed, but the US economy has been a lot stronger than expected. And certainly, on growth differential and when it comes to asset allocations, the US continues to appeal more than Europe and many of the G10 currency peers that we can think about. That could change next year. I think, potentially, Japan could become more interesting, but, we start the year, I think, in 2025, yet again, with, I would say, the path of least resistance being one of continued upside in the dollar.
So, Audrey, is there any credible bear case for the U.S. dollar here? I feel like I asked that question every time for the last 5 years.
Well, we could mention current account. This was the debt position, but the big difference between, the debt position didn't even move the euro. The fiscal situation in France hasn't really moved the euro, so that's telling. But the U.S. economy is even better positioned in a way that it's running high debt, has a high debt predicament. It's not looking like it's going to improve anytime soon. But the U.S. economy has the U.S. dollar. And for now, there is no alternative to the US dollar. So we kind of go around circle with that. And that gives extra leeway when it comes to being quite aggressive in terms of fiscal policy. So for me, in terms of trying to go back to your question, Paul, and try to think about what could turn around euro dollar, for instance, I can't, at the moment, there's one point I would make is that everybody's euro bearish, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable. Even I am quite euro bearish now, which is quite a telling sign for anyone who knows how I think about the market. But I kind of think what could trigger a turnaround in the euro outside of Europe. So there's three things that come to mind, and your previous guest touched on one of them. I think any kind of improvement on the Russia-Ukraine position, that would be very welcome from a European macro perspective in terms of German position. And this is something that's not expected. Second is China stimulus coming through. Does China finally turn the corners, give us a slightly better kind of message on growth? And the final one, quickly, Tom, is US. Maybe this year, 2025, is the year when finally the US economy actually weakens more than what the market was expecting. But the last point, I don't have a very strong conviction.
Audrey, thank you so much. Audrey Child-Friedman in London, Queen Victoria Street here on Foreign Exchange for Bloomberg Intelligence. Here's a release from American Airlines. We lift guidance because Paul Sweeney is going to see the Eagles in Las Vegas.
Yep.
Lots of people doing that, and we see it. This is a jump on American Airlines center tendency, 37-ish cents. Now center tendency, call it 65 cents.
Yeah.
It's almost a double.
It is. So we got some good guidance from American Airlines. And it's not just American Airlines, Tom. We also got some improved guidance from Southwest Airlines, JetBlue as well. So it looks like the U.S. travel industry, they had record passenger numbers over the Thanksgiving holiday. So I guess they're starting to see that kind of creep into the Christmas holiday as well. So good for them.
Well, it's again, the great missed call of this year has been growth.
Yeah.
To me, that's a single story.
When was the last time you had an empty middle seat in an airline? I can't even remember that. There were back in the day, You'd have the whole
74%.
You'd have the whole row empty.
Yeah.
You could lie down, going on your flight to like Kansas City. No more.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been that way for 20 years, I don't think. So again, great load factor, as the kids in the airline business say.
Listen to you.
Yep, exactly. I learned that.
Very good.
Yep.
Also, I should point out, America chooses Citigroup as sole credit card partner.
There you
That's
go.
probably a more important announcement
Yep.
than guidance, isn't it?
Exactly right. I've got my United American card, so I'm all locked in there.
Well, we'll have to see. American Airlines out with a
Good
lift.
for
We'll
them.
see if we
Yep.
see that with other airlines. It doesn't really move the market. Red on the screen, it's fractional, as it's been here day after day. The VIX, we did get a 12 handle on the VIX yesterday, 13.49. Can we make a note in the control room if anybody, put the eggnog down, guys? You see their eggnog in there?
Yeah, I know.
And
They're
it's
kicking
like
back.
Jamaica rum and
Yep.
all that.
There's a lot of people in that control room.
There
That's
is.
not good.
It's like union. That's all there is
Come on,
to
guys.
it.
It's radio. It's all electronic.
It
We don't need you guys.
We don't need that. We should say to the control room, let's try to get Dean Kernett in to talk about a VIX of 12, now VIX 13.49, the 10-year real yield. That's what I follow, 1.92%. Please stay with us in 30 minutes. David Rosenberg will be with us from Canada. And I should point out next, 4 minutes away, important economic data. Jobs Day tomorrow. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, we had another banner day on Wall Street. Fresh record closing highs for all the major averages. The Dow closing above the 45,000 mark for the first time. And this comes as we get ready for initial jobless claims numbers for last week. Ahead of it right now, futures, not much movement. We have NASDAQ futures down about 11, Dow futures down 37, S&P futures down 2. The numbers coming in for initial jobless claims. The survey was for 215,000. Application came in a bit higher, 224,000. The prior was revised up to 215,000. You take a look at continuing claims. Those are actually a tick lower, so those going a bit lower than actually expected. Now we go to the market reaction. We go to NASDAQ futures, still down about 10 points. Dow futures down 26. We have S&P futures down 1. We have the 2-year yield, 4.15%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%, and that's up 1 basis point. We head over to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 0.1%. We have the Korean won down 0.3%. We have the euro up 0.4% at 105.55 against the dollar. And Bitcoin right now above 103,000. We have shares of Southwest Airlines up 2%. The carrier says there's been resilient travel demand, and because of that, they're raising their estimates for unit revenue in the fourth quarter. American Airlines up 6%, raised its profit expectations for the final months of the year. And finally, supermarket chain Kroger, third quarter sales missed estimates. It also stressed its commitment. It said it's going to close the Albertsons merger. We shall see. Its shares are down about 0.5%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Claims there with Lisa Mateo, and we'll have Jobs Day for you tomorrow. In New York City, we welcome all of you across the nation in the tri-state area, and particularly on the island of Manhattan. It has been a day of perpetual sirens as the police are in search of a suspect in murder. With an update with new information, our John Tucker.
All right, just getting word. ABC is reporting, and they're citing unidentified sources for this piece of information, that a search warrant is now being sought in connection with the suspect who's wanted in the shooting death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in Midtown outside the Hilton Hotel yesterday. So again, a search warrant is being sought at this point. They say they are getting closer to a suspect at this point, and they're citing police sources for this. Earlier, we told you that ABC News, as well as the New York Post, had reported that the casings that were found on the sidewalk after the shooting actually had inscriptions on them. Some of them read, "Deny, Defend, and Depose." United Health, of course, the CEO, again, Brian Thompson, dead as a result of the shooting that took place yesterday. NBC News spoke to her, his wife, his surviving wife in Minnesota, and she told police, and she told NBC as well, that her husband had received threats in the past. We should tell you that United Health ranks highest when it comes to the percentage of claims denied. That's nearly twice the industry average. So that could possibly speak to a motive in this deadly shooting, this shocking shooting that occurred in Midtown yesterday. And as I pointed out earlier, no shortage of surveillance video from this shooting, and that's what police have been going on. The suspect was last seen on a bicycle in Central Park, where he fled.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Major shout out to Keith Power yesterday of the New York City Council on short notice visiting us. He's a councilman, 51 council members, and he's a council member from east of the Hilton up the Upper East Side. That was important to get his perspective of the people here involved on the island of Manhattan in this tragedy. And of course, the news flow will continue to follow it with Michael Barr and our John Tucker. Futures churn, I would say, Paul, off the economic data, it was a quiescent response. I did not see blinky.
No, I did not.
The Bloomberg Launchpad. It's CFA talk.
Initial jobless claims came in at 224,000, as Lisa reported. The consensus was 215. Last month revised just a little bit higher to 215,000.
Now is almost an annual thing that we do. At the end of the year, we try to just stop and talk about the emotion that all of us face. At the absolute minimum, gold is a cultural lodestone back to pre-biblical times. Gold is something different. It's something very different, Paul, at the corner of 57th Street and 5th Avenue. All four corners, you can enjoy gold. And without question, the one that holds the high ground on this is the Hong Kong and Shanghai banking corporations. James Steele is absolutely definitive. Is the price of gold, I think of Bitcoin and the madness of 100,000, has the price of gold this year detached from the microeconomics of gold or the industrial jewelry use of gold?
Well, certainly, and thank you for having me, Tom. Certainly, if you were to look at the underlying physical demand, that is what's absorbed by retailers, bars, coins, small bars, coins, and jewelry, one would not expect gold to be up where we are now. But gold is a hybrid of macroeconomic and geopolitical factors, plus those micro ones. And what's been propelling gold this year has been, well, primarily geopolitical risk. Risk of all kinds, actually.
Who's buying gold? Is it the Chinese central bank? Is it Chinese individuals? Is it the United States? Who's buying this stuff?
China and India, where 50% of all the physical gold demand in the world lies,
really?
Has been, yes, and 50% of jewelry as well.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't want to keep repeating 50%, but 50% of all gold demand is in jewelry, physical demand, and 50% of all gold demand, including jewelry, is bought in China and India. So they are massive importers, and they have cooled in recent months. We had a jump in India in August because they reduced the tariffs, but that was pretty much a one-off. And we know by looking at the Mumbai discount or premium to London and the Shanghai premium or discount to London that demand is soft. So who's buying it then? That's investors who are not buying jewelry, not necessarily buying coins or small bars. They're buying large bars or they're buying on the over-the-counter market. These are asset managers, hedge funds, commodity trading advisors, because they've been getting positive technical signals. And we shouldn't forget the people that really helped kick the whole gold rally off. Central bank demand is not at the red-hot levels of last year or the year before, but it's still substantial.
How do you think about gold in the context of Bitcoin? Again, as Tom mentioned, we've got Bitcoin now over $100,000 per token. I mean, what's the relationship there, if any, from your perspective?
Well, I think you have to ask, you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of these two instruments, and why do we buy gold versus something else? Well, you buy gold for the physicality. You're able to touch it. You're able to store it. We'll store it for you,
yes,
or
you
other
will.
bullion banks will store it for you.
Which we still need a tour of your vault there.
It's difficult these days.
Is it? Okay. Need to know basis. Okay.
And we do have a substantial vault operations globally, and the difference between gold. One of the differences between gold and Bitcoin is you can hold gold. You can have it.
Yep.
Also, it's the longevity. And I'm not a plus or a negative on the Bitcoin front. I'm agnostic. But gold has a long history of being an excellent portfolio diversifier.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons that central banks want it.
James Steele, a delicate question. I don't want you to get in trouble with the general counsel, who I'm sure is tuned in to this conversation at HSBC. But the basic idea, and the FT and also the Wall Street Journal had this really serious money laundering acquisitions, with Tether being the Bitcoin stablecoin currency of choice, if you will, in the digital world. Is gold used for money laundering? It's like too heavy, right?
Yes, effectively.
There's not a criminal tone within the greater gold universe.
No, and here's where, the London Bullion Market Association, headed by Ruth Kroll, has really been excellent, in this for sourcing gold. Where does it come from? Making sure that it's not being mined in places that are exploiting the population, tracking it. We only accept London Bullion Market good delivery, as would any other bullion bank.
Right.
And so therefore, it's just not. It's also not as easy to steal it. It's not like the movies where you see all these blokes throwing gold into the back of a van after they've broken into something. It is dense and it is heavy.
Yeah, okay, this is great. James Steele, thank you so much. An annual visit here, the state of gold. I want to come back. I want to ask him about the Perle Couleur earrings.
Really?
Van Cleef selling these jewels, 18 karat yellow gold, malachite, $3,150.
Wow.
Do you think they just price them off, James Steele, on the price of an ounce of gold?
Absolutely.
Maybe. We'll find out, folks. We'll do some research on that. Lisa Mateo just woke up from her morning nap here and said, "Oh, that'll be interesting to say the least." Futures a -2 right now. The VIX 13.42. With our news in New York City, Michael Bell.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to address his nation this evening in Paris after Prime Minister Michel Barnier lost a no-confidence vote yesterday. Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll reports the two leaders met for about an hour today.
He would have had to, by law, tender his resignation, but it is the president's prerogative whether or not to designate him a caretaker prime minister, which happened the last time around when this happened back in July, or whether they'd need to be more of, perhaps some negotiation. Perhaps he wants to reappoint Michel Barnier, even though the man himself ruled that out beforehand.
Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll reports whoever Macron picks will face the same financial pressures that sank the government. South Korea's president has replaced his defense minister as opposition parties move to impeach both men over a brief imposition of martial law. Opposition parties are pushing for a vote on a motion to impeach President Yoon Suk-Yeol on Saturday evening. They hold 192 seats but need 200 votes for the motion to pass. American educators are sounding the alarm after results from an international test found American children are falling behind the rest of the world in math. Scores from the test called Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study stretches from between 2019 and 2023. Some experts point to COVID disrupting education, but Peggy Carr of the National Center for Education Statistics says scores were falling before the pandemic.
This decline that we're seeing was there in 2015. So all of this cannot be blamed on COVID. We have been struggling with this declining scores, particularly in math, for a while.
The National Center for Education's Peggy Carr says American fourth graders dropped 18 points in math, eighth graders dropped 27 points. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, the revenue, the size, the scope, scale of the NFL versus the new betting racket known as college football, are they equal?
No, not even close. NFL's the big daddy and always will be. But the college sports and particularly college football is bigger than it's ever been. I mean, you brought up the betting. That's brought in even, I think, it's brought in even more people to kind of the game and kind of the interest level. So, and now we've got the expanded playoffs. Here we got 12 teams going to be in a playoff for a national championship. So made for TV.
Made for TV. I get it. Notre Dame is number 4.
Yep.
Penn State, okay, they're new this year.
Boom.
Texas, beat the fighting Texas Aggies.
Yep.
Alabama's lost 3, and the TV people really, really, really want Alabama.
I think so.
They're like the Dallas Cowboys,
exactly.
Right?
I think so. I mean, even though Coach Saban's not there, it's still Alabama.
Who picks?
I don't know. I'm not really sure who picks.
A committee.
I guess a committee. Yeah, I'm not really sure. But I mean, to have Alabama, they can win it any given year. That's how good they've always been. So, but it'll be good. I think this playoffs will be good for college football. Certainly. For the networks.
Can I point out Army is 10-1?
Yeah, awesome.
That's something.
Yep. Army-Navy game's going to be fantastic because Navy's good as well this year.
It'll be interesting to see. College and NFL football with Paul Sweeney. Futures -3. James Steele with us from HSBC. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, we've got little movement in futures. This is after applications for U.S. unemployment benefits rose to a one-month high in Thanksgiving week. Initial claims, they increased by 9,000 to 224,000 last week. That was higher than expected. Continuing claims, they fell, and this all comes ahead of payrolls data out tomorrow. We have NASDAQ futures down 19 points, Dow futures down 56, but at 45,050. S&P futures down 3 points at 6,094. We head to the 2-year yield, 4.17%, up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.21%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude $72 a barrel, WTI crude $68 a barrel, and that's after OPEC Plus delayed the revival of its oil production by 3 months. To currencies, we have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.2%. The Korean won down same 0.2%. Political turmoil in South Korea. We have the euro up about 0.4% at 105.57 against the dollar. That's ahead of an address by Emmanuel Macron at 2 2 p.m. Wall Street time. Can't forget Bitcoin up more than 102,000. Apple partner Foxconn reporting a second consecutive month of single-digit sales growth, and that's raising some concerns that demand for AI infrastructure won't be able to offset the weak iPhone sales. You have Disney boosting its annual dividend by 33%. And finally, have you looked at your 401k lately? I don't know where John Tucker is, but according to a report from Vanguard, 2024, the average balance for those between 55 and 64 is $244,750. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I feel comfortable in the triple leveraged all cash. You know, it's come
Sleeps
down
like a
little
baby.
bit. The gross yield was 15% triple leveraged, and it's come down to like 12.3, and they take their usual 4%. So, you know, it's like pretty good net clean.
Okay.
We have an incredibly busy morning for you. David Rosenberg will join us at the top of the 9 o'clock hour, an important Francine Lacroix conversation coming up. But we finish strong here in the next number of minutes with James Steele, an annual visit on the state of gold. Does the fashion, do they all want to be in jewelry? I mean, is it just the markups in gold jewelry are so good that the business plan is just more jewelry, or is there an oversupply of that stuff?
Well, here's what's interesting. Only 30% of gold jewelry is purchased in the OECD markets. 70% is purchased in the non-OECD markets. And there's a huge difference between the saleable items and the markup. The markup in New York, London, Tokyo is quite high. And academic data, research has been done on this to show that you buy jewelry in the West based on income and employment, not necessarily price, whereas in the non-OECD world, it's almost entirely a function of price, which is why you get volatility in the jewelry demand.
Okay. So
in
there's
Asia.
there's a aspirational part of Western OECD jewelry. We're all living that every day. Lisa, you know, what she showed me in Bazaar, it's unbelievable. But in the rest of the world, is it I'm wearing my net worth on my wrist?
Well, very much so in a place like India, especially in the rural tribal belts where the majority of gold is purchased, which can be related to the monsoon, believe it or not, and agricultural income. So yes, Middle East, much of Africa, Southeast Asia, it's a form of savings and adornment.
Mm-hmm.
It's the mixture of those two things.
So gold's up 28% year to date. Spot silver is up 31%. What's the silver story?
Well, I think the silver story to a great degree is the gold story.
Okay.
And we see this constantly where gold makes a move. The silver market's much thinner. It's moved with less volume dollar-wise.
Okay.
And many times large players will miss a gold move and they'll move into silver. So you'll see this movement in the gold-silver ratio can go from 80 up to 90. When it gets to 90, it looks as if silver is relatively cheap vis-a-vis gold. It's not necessarily the underlying fundamentals of the silver market, which I don't think would necessarily really justify it in the up in the 30s. There's plenty of silver around, and the industrial demand is good, but it's slowed.
Right. James, thank you so much. I hope to go shopping with you here in the next coming days so my wallet isn't cleaned out. James Steele with HSBC on gold. And we should point out the gold right now, $26.71 the ounce. Marie Le Pen is on the far right of France politics. It's not equivalent to what we see within the American Republican Party. There is a history of the National Rally Group within the National Assembly, but there is a heritage here as the youngest daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who is iconic as a conservative, somewhat Gaullist voice across the history of France. Our Francine Lacroix spoke to Marine Le Pen. Here is the leader of the right.
En tout cas, ce que j'ai dit, c'est que la démission du président de la République.
What I said was that the president's resignation is a personal decision for him and can only take place, in my view, when a political crisis happens or an institutional crisis can no longer have any other solution than the resignation of the president of the republic. What I do wish, on the other hand, because for sure there will be new legislative elections in the next few months, is that we work on a voting system by then that enables us to have a real majority, whatever that majority may be. But the country needs a majority. It can't live for months and years with 3 blocs, which in reality can't implement a policy.
A Francois Lecoin conversation with Marine Le Pen. We all know within America the separation of geography, the difference from New York City and Queens, from Boston, say out past Worcester to the west, and of course across this great nation. France is no different. Expert on this is Stephen Carroll, driving our radio coverage in London, of course, a decade with France 24. Stephen Carroll, is this Paris against the rest of them, with Marie Le Pen having a southern France audience?
I mean, that was this, I suppose, old conception of where the support for the National Rally was, be it in we used to talk about the North and the South being the two extremes where the National Rally had their strongholds. But these elections, the last 2 sets really have shown the spread of where support for the National Rally is, and that how that's been growing in that time. And we see that represented in the position that Marine Le Pen now holds in the French Parliament. I mean, at the time that, the not extremely long time that I've been covering French politics, they went from having no representatives to having 2 and 4 to now looking at around 120 representatives in the French Parliament. That's happened over sort of a space of about 15 years. So the question of the support has been spread everywhere. And it's not simple to say that it's an urban-rural divide either, because there are strongholds of other parties. Brittany, for example, traditionally voted left. Of course, a lot of them had voted for Emmanuel Macron in the second round of elections as well. The political landscape here is sort of creating new norms now, because the way that the parliament worked out in the last elections was that we had these 3 main blocs, and everything gets a little bit more complicated. But it all, at least in the last campaign, comes back to cost of living and inflation, issues that we're seeing elsewhere as well.
Stephen, kind of for our audience here, what are the next steps we should be looking for from France?
Well, look, most importantly, we're looking forward to Emmanuel Macron's address to the nation at 8 o'clock local, so 2 p.m. in New York. Later on today, we'll be covering that for you on Bloomberg Radio and television. But that's going to be the question of, will that be the moment he chooses to announce a new prime minister? He's having a host of meetings this afternoon with political leaders. One would assume that he's discussing names with them of who might be able to build a workable coalition within the parliament as well. The focus really is on the centre-left, whether he can win over the Socialist Party, traditionally a party of power in France, whether he can get them on board and perhaps develop a workable coalition.
Stephen, thank you so much. I hope we visit with you in the 9 o'clock hour. I don't know what the schedule is, your day calendar, but Stephen Carroll there. Why are we doing this, folks? Because I guess the perils into American democracy and tumult right now.
Yep.
I mean, they're not exact. I don't want to write too much into it, but it's like, could this happen here?
Sure.
Kind of thing.
You see it here in the U.S., the change what we've seen here politically here in the U.S., and we've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in, I'm not sure what we saw in South Korea over the past couple of days. But
So Riley from St. Louis, who's a huge fan of the show, she says, Tom, you're doing Tom Elmhurst. He's a guy that mixes records. And I said, you got to do Jackson, Maine.
Really?
Where Allie walks out on stage. I said, what are you talking about? And because Riley explains to me that Jackson, Maine is singing, and Allie comes out, and they sing together. It's from a movie from a few years ago. It was bigger than Moana 2.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr with us as well. Lions Packers tonight. Barr not focused this morning.
No, of course
Let's
not.
be careful.
No.
We'll see that tonight. Team coverage tomorrow morning of Lions Packers. We welcome all of you. The news flow internationally. Francine Lacroix's interview with Marine Le Pen. We heard that moments ago. It's out with Bloomberg. Of course, picked up by very much Europe. In America, we had job claims. Same old. A buoyant market. We'll go to David Rosenberg here in a moment. And then really looking at it all, we go over to the Pacific Rim with Korea, those tensions as well. And in fact, Paul, red on the screen, it's over.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, the S&P down 2 solid points there, Tom. The Dow off 50 and the NASDAQ down 14 here. What a move we've had year to date, though, boy.
13.47 on the VIX. Busy morning, and we say good morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. There's no other way to do it. We thank you for that and on your commute across America as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We're coming off record for Wall Street's main indexes. This is after Fed Chair Jay Powell. He described the U.S. economy in remarkably good shape. This happened at a New York Times event. The Dow closed above 45,000 for the first time. Take a look at Dow futures right now. That 45.58. We have it down, though, about 48 points. So little movement this morning. NASDAQ futures down about 13. S&P futures down about 2. We head to the 2-year yield, 4.16%. That's up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year, 4.21%, and that's up 3 basis points. French assets gain. Euro strengthening. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen. She says France can pass a budget for 2025 in the next few weeks. So we'll check in with the CAC in Paris right now, up about 0.1%. The euro is up about 0.5% at 105.67 against the dollar. Korean equities retreated. The Kospi right now down about 0.9%, nearly 1%, with the country's ruling party looking to prevent President Yoon Suk-Yeol's impeachment. You have the Korean won down about 0.2%. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.2%. Bitcoin blowing past 100,000. It's now at 102,000, just above that. That was thanks to hopes of a crypto-friendly Washington. MicroStrategy's Bitcoin-fueled 500% rally this year really made it Wall Street's hottest trade. Its shares are up about 8%. Also checking in with Coinbase up 5%, Marathon Digital up 5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. By all acclaim, the public servant of France, I should say, Michel Barnier has been dealt a very difficult set of cards as prime minister. He did what you do. You accept the call for your nation. And he has basically been trampled here in the last, Paul, 90 days, 100 days. Yeah. The headline moments ago, the Prime Minister of the Republic of France, Michel Barnier, resigns after government loses no confidence vote. I've had the privilege of interviewing him with Francine Lacroix over the years. Francine is extremely close with Mr. Barnier. And all I can say, Paul, is this a dutiful public servant serving within a time of just shocking tumult within the nation.
Absolutely, Tom. And again, we're going to hear from President Macron. He's going to have a
2 p.m.-ish?
2 p.m. Wall Street time, 8 p.m. Paris time, and we'll see if he has a new prime minister.
Very good. Joining us right now for the half hour, David Rosenberg of Rosenberg Research in Toronto. I need to explain this to people that what is so important with David Rosenberg is the heritage where you stole Merrill Lynch research for no other reason. A guy named Farrell and a guy named Rosenberg. He's continued that tradition. And if you steal David Rosenberg's research now, it's about the reasserting of a deflationary or disinflationary trend. David, do you once again just say the permanence here is towards lower interest rates?
I do believe that. Wouldn't surprise me if the Fed engages in what people would call a hawkish cut on December 18th, signal a pause, and probably the dot plots will go from 4 cuts to 2. And then we go to March, And I believe the data will then push them back to predicting 4 cuts from 2.
Yeah.
So these dot plots move around a lot because the Fed is just basically operates on a contemporaneous basis. But I do believe that the trend in rates will be lower. And I think that the trend in inflation is going to be lower. And I think that, the one thing that I'm confident of more now than I was even a few weeks ago is that we're not going to be seeing the big tariff hikes that were being pledged during the campaign. It's very clear just early on before Trump's taken office, and we've seen how he's handled Mexico and Canada, that the tariffs are really being used as a weapon to achieve other security goals. I don't think we're going to get the big tariff increases. I think that, the economics team he's put together has been pretty impressive. I think they're going to encourage Trump to resist those temptations for a global trade war, big tariff increases. And then what's left is going to be deficit reduction. And that's not going to come from the president, but it's going to come from Congress.
David,
we're going to get deregulation and more oil production.
David, let me go to the heart of the matter.
I find it very difficult to believe that we're going to generate an inflation cycle out of those developments.
David, the heart of the matter is that we had a triple stimulus out of the pandemic. A question that many people ask, is the American exceptionalism, is the American boom in productivity nothing more than a follow-on of a unique stimulus that austere Europe didn't do?
Well, the productivity side really comes from the supply side of the economy, not the demand side. So there was really nothing, I don't think, that we can point to stimulus being the driver of productivity. Curiously enough, what COVID managed to do, and that's the reason why productivity growth has been surprisingly strong, is we came out of COVID with a productivity shift to the upside. And the one sector actually that has led the growth in productivity has not been technology or finance. It's actually been the retail sector, because during the pandemic and the lockdowns and the aftermath, if you didn't digitize your business and follow the Amazon model as a retailer, you're going to go out of business. So even before what's happened on the AI side, which the markets certainly believe that this is going to be a productivity game changer, and it probably will be, the post-COVID environment actually generated this sort of productivity improvements that Jay Powell's been talking about. They're real. And then the question is going to be, for the next 5 or 10 years, what will this model shift from the inflection point on the technology curve going to do to productivity in the future? And I will actually tip my hat to the bulls who say that this is going to be a game changer.
David, the Federal Reserve appears to be focusing on the labor market here. We got initial jobless claims today, a little bit higher than expectations. What's your view of the U.S. labor market, given that the Fed is really looking at it?
The way I would describe it is cooling, but not contracting. Even if we get the consensus estimate of, call it, close to 200,000 tomorrow, in the context of what happened in October, that leaves you with an average of about 100,000. So the trend is cooling off. I expect that will continue. And like most of the other parts of the economic pie, the incoming data have just been so confusing. You get the numbers from JOLTS, and they show openings up, but hiring's down. You get the ADP number out, and the ADP showed that hiring amongst large businesses surged, but yet small companies, which are really in the weeds of the economy a lot more than big companies, small companies on net have let people go in 3 of the past 4 months. I read the Beige Book yesterday, and I'm shrugging my shoulders as to how Jay Powell can talk about the economy being strong when the Beige Book itself had about 250 references to the economy either being slightly growing, modestly growing, or just outright weak. Only 29 times was the word strong used in the Beige Book in a 51-page document, to which I say, Mr. Powell, if you're going to spend all the time, resources, and money on the beige book, why don't you at least listen to it? What was very striking in the beige book, and I would still say it's qualitative, it's not quantitative, but it's not revised. It just gets updated every 6 weeks. And I don't know if you guys went through it. I went through it tooth and nail because that's what I have to do. It's not the most pleasurable read in the world. The labor market, I mean, there were elements that improved in the past 6 weeks. Overall economic activity, yes. The consumer, yes. But funny enough, the labor market was downgraded. And there were numerous comments on how wage growth is cooling. So how do you get wage growth cooling in a labor market that everybody thinks is tight or tightening? So again, we just are riddled with all these anomalies and inconsistencies. But I would say that if you want to trend out the data, labor market not contracting yet, but it is cooling off.
Okay, David, one final question quickly here. It is the Rosenberg bull market. Can you own stocks here, David Rosenberg?
Well, I'm having my own epiphany right now on this topic because, let's face it, it was the best year for the stock market since 2019. I'm not alone. I mean, the consensus at the end of last year for the end of this year for the S&P 500 was 4,900, and we've just blown through 6,000. I think that there's a couple of things that are happening that should have you feeling bullish. It's not. I'm still concerned over market positioning, and sentiment is off the charts, and I am expecting a near-term correction. The question is, which would be normal, is what you do if we get the dip. And I think that you'd want to buy the dip. And I say that because, I've been calling this a bubble for a while, but it's maybe a bubble if you look at trailing P multiples or one-year forward P multiples. But if, in fact, we've had an inflection point on the technology curve, if we've had a model shift when it comes to what AI is going to deliver in terms of future profitability and productivity, I'm thinking that the market is sending you a message that that investors have basically lengthened their time horizons. So all the classic valuation metrics that I've been using, I'm not going to say they're obsolete, but they're probably just not relevant to today's backdrop. Right. So I would say that, I guess if you can want to color me probably more positive on the stock market on a secular basis, based on everything that I've seen this year in particular, then I would say that, expect a near-term correction. I think it would be normal considering the nosebleed levels we're at. However, I think it's a dip that you probably will want to buy.
David, we're out of time, but next time you're on, we want to talk to you about Canada as a 51st state. We'll have to see how that goes. David Rosenberg's with Rosenberg Research. Where did this come from? Canada, is a 51st state. It's sort of like out there in the zeitgeist. I'm like, you're kidding me.
I don't know. I love going to Canada, I love Montreal and Toronto, Vancouver. Just one of the most spectacular cities I've ever visited.
I mean, Michael Barr never shared this because he's from Detroit, but remember your first Molson Golden?
Yeah, back in the day, sure. Labatt's.
There was this period, folks, a million years ago where to have real beer, you had to go north of the border. Labatt's, Molson Golden.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, that I never quaffed it myself, but there it was. Futures, Rosenberg lifts the market. We were -3. Now we're -1. Please stay with us. Lots coming up. So good conversation as well. On YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Futures Report brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we got futures pretty much treading water. This is after the S&P 500's 56 record close of 2024, and that really put the index on course for its best year since 2019. You had Fed Chair Jay Powell told a crowd at a New York Times event that downside risk from the labor market has receded. The Fed's Mary Daly told PBS that there's no sense of urgency to lower rates. So we have levels high, but it seems like there's not much movement. So we start with Dow futures at 45,079, but down 27 points. We have NASDAQ futures down 8 points. We have S&P futures down 1. The 2-year yield 4.16%, up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 4.20%, and that's up about 2 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3% because of the news flow. I want to point out the Korean won. It's down about 0.1%. We have the euro up about 0.6% at 105.76 against the dollar. Bitcoin, have to point it out, up 5% at more than 102,000. To earnings we go. We'll start with American Eagle Outfitters down 14%. The retailer cut its sales outlook. Then we go to Signet Jewelers. That's the owner of Zales K Jewelers. Their shares down 12% after it lowered its full year projections. And looks like consumers, they're looking for deals because you have shares of discount retailer Five Below. They're up 13%. A reported surprise jump at same-store sales. And finally, yes, enjoy that burrito because it's going to get more expensive. Chipotle announced a 2% increase in menu prices nationwide. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
So Afterthought did the delivery thing with Chipotle. And the thing that it looked like you could feed her for like 5 days.
It's huge, yes.
So whatever that thing clocks in at, what, $8, $9?
More than that.
It
Really?
was like 15.
Really, $15?
And then you put the 15 delivery thing that you paid.
Oh yeah, forget about the
That's
delivery.
not
But so it's a $15 burrito, and you're putting 2% on that.
2% increase.
So that's $1.50. That's 30 cents.
You
do
the math.
Why are you creating this PR for 30 cents on a $15 burrito?
Because people have already been complaining that they're skipping on the portions.
But then they went the total other way and overfilled. So which caused me to go from 3 tacos to 2. Oh my God. Because they put so much in it.
They do. Yeah.
They still serve margaritas?
No.
At some locations,
At some
they do.
selected locations. Thank you. Your Chipotle update with Lisa Mateo this morning. For Global Wall Street, flat out, this is our conversation of the day. Ali Melli is with Monticello Capital Partners. He's got a tour of duty at Goldman Sachs, and among other things, is expert on what I'm going to call interesting, sophisticated investment, like private equity, private credit, and that. And Paul, to me, the backdrop, and I remember a snowy day, coming to work, 2 feet of snow on the ground. This is back when New York City got snow.
Yep.
Looking down Park Avenue at the New York Central Building, which became the MetLife Building, which became the Helmsley Building, and Andrea Cheng writing it up for CoStar. It's done. It's, I guess,
Tom,
it's foreclosure. Is that the right word? I'm not going to go into the math now because we got to get to Ali, but it's a symptom, Paul, of the tensions that out there on workouts in private credit and private equity.
Yeah, and particularly on the office space here. Ali Melli joins us, founder and CIO of Monticello Capital Partners. Ali, talk to us about the private credit business. I kind of said to a lot of people, if I were to start in the business again, if I was a young person, I think I'd go into private credit. That seems to be where the money is flowing. How do you guys think about the private credit business?
We think it's a business that is expanding, part of it driven by the regulatory push to take risky lending out of the banks. If you think of the bank model, you have depositors who are not really signing up for taking risk or losing their deposits. They happen also to be voters, so whenever there is a crisis, politicians are very much incentivized to bail out the banks, and there is a backlash. So there was this, I think, rightful push to take risky lending out of the deposit-taking institutions. And now as the private credit has expanded, you have investors who sign up to take that risk, who know that there could be losses, they are putting money with some of the biggest investment management firms in the world and say, okay, 10% of my portfolio might be, if you're a high net worth individual, 10%, 15%, 5%, whatever your financial advisor might advise you. I put it in lending-driven assets, and they are signing up for that risk. So to some extent, it has increased the resilience of U.S. financial system.
So you see it as a positive. I see it as, like, I started my career at the Chase Manhattan Bank and the Chase Credit Training Program, and we lent against cash flow, cable company, just all these crazy wireless companies, all this silliness. I lent against air, basically, airwaves. They're letting that business go? I don't understand, because that was such a profitable business for us. I made money when I made the loan. I syndicated all my risk away, and then I went to do the next loan. Why are the banks walking away from that?
Well, they're still staying in that business to some extent. Like if you think of JP Morgan or Goldman, my alma mater, they now are essentially running some of their, again, private credit funds from their asset management business. So they still are in that business, but maybe not by using their deposits.
As I mentioned, real estate, the Helmsley building, and we're going to do much more on this next week. The schedule right now is so busy, folks. We'll get to the continued collapse in office buildings and that, and the drama of it. In private equity, there's all creative things to do because you can't liquefy your assets out right now. Does private credit have the same challenges as commercial real estate and private equity, in that internally private credit can't finish transactions, or is it in a safe place?
It is in a safer place, but it is not out of the woods.
Then what's the risk right now in private credit?
I think there are 2 or 3 maybe trends happening. One of them is that there are some like isolated corners. Like if you look at something like residential solar, there is a lot of regulatory pushback. There was push by some of the private credit firms to essentially invest in residential solar loans. There are areas of challenge there. There is a bigger, I would argue, secular challenge, which is capital structures that were formed in a low interest rate environment, with the assumption that, maybe the Fed is going to cut the rates, we are going to be...
And they were not hedged from low rate to high rate, price down. There's no hedging against those within private credit?
Again, depends on the sector, but if it's a company that you are driven off of EBITDA, they usually don't hedge.
They don't hedge.
And if even in some of the real estate hedges, the loans themselves are floating rate loans. So to some extent, from the viewpoint of the asset manager, I'm going to get floating rate income. But if the operating company or your borrower doesn't have the cash flow to pay, it doesn't matter whether you have a floating, essentially, loan on your book. And then it pushes down the valuation of assets, especially what we are seeing.
The single sentence from the Costa article in the Helmsley building, the New York Central building. The loan has a floating interest rate of 7.44%.
Yeah, that's a lot different than what we're used to for the last 15 years.
Can you come back next week? Can we see you weekly into the spring?
So just 30 seconds here, best value in credit out there today? Where do you guys see the best value?
Really areas where banks had exited the market. We do see maybe with some bias in specialty finance, areas where the banks are still continuing to exit and hasn't come. The other thing that I just generally see, because the spreads are so tight, the source of alpha may be on the short side on the credit markets rather than the long side.
Okay.
That's a
all right.
There's never enough time. Ali, come back. We gotta do. Can we make a note? Get Eric. Can we get Ali back in here for a really, really long effort? Ali Mallard of the Monticello. I think this is an issue that's not going to go away. Paul, you've been great on this, but we don't have an opinion, folks, on sectors or investments. But can I just say the surveillance radar is up?
Yeah. As
I look at real estate, as I look at private equity challenges, and as
Ali
Ali said, there's some private credit realities.
Yeah, I want to see some of these, we're starting to see some of these marquee buildings change hands at just huge discounts, and I wonder if that's laying in the bottom for office real estate. I don't know.
We'll have to see. The Helmsley building at the end of Park Avenue in some form of foreclosure. We'll have much more on that from Bloomberg Real Estate here in the coming hours and days. Futures, fractional. I'm going to say flat. Let's be optimistic. The VIX 13.48. On YouTube, it's our new digital experiment. Subscribe on YouTube to Bloomberg Podcast. Please do that. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this opening bell report brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit bny.com. All right, it's going to be interesting to see how the markets open after this banner day yesterday. Today, investors have a little bit more economic data to look through after applications for U.S. unemployment benefits. They rose to a one-month high in Thanksgiving week. So let's get right to it right now. We'll start with the S&P 500 because we're seeing a little bit of a tick up about 1 point at 6,087. We head over to the Dow right now, little change, down 24 points at 44,991. And finally, the NASDAQ up about 0.1%, 18 points at 19,753. The two-year yield, 4.17%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have Brent crude, $72 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. Spot gold at $2,645 an ounce. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up down about 0.3%. The Korean won down 0.1%, and we also have the euro up about 0.6%. That's because of all the news flow going on this morning. American Eagle Outfitters checking with a few retail stocks. They are down 16%. Meanwhile, Five Below up 14%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Elisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate that this morning. It is, I guess it's a manhunt, and that is the proper way to call it here, off the shock of where we were 24 hours ago following a shooting in Manhattan. Is our John Tucker, and you have an important update, John.
Yeah, it could be narrowing. ABC reports that police appear to be closing in on the identity of the suspect who gunned down the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. So police have sought a search warrant for a location in New York City where they believe the suspect may have been staying. ABC says police now have a pretty good sense of who the shooter is, and they're still looking for him. He left clues at the scene. Now, the words delay and depose were written on a shell casing in a live round recovered in front of the New York Hilton Midtown. The inscriptions loosely echo a book, the title of which is Delay, Deny, Defend, which describes tactics allegedly used by insurers to deny claims. Law enforcement officials may look at it, and it suggests a potential motive, anger against health insurers. United Health was among a group of companies recently slammed in a Senate report for using automated tools to increase claim denials. Now, while the words could suggest the shooting might be motivated by some kind of insurance denial, investors also have to consider the words on the shell casing may be a distraction designed to deviate from the true motive of this shooting. But again, just to recap, it looks like they're seeking a search warrant, and according to ABC, they are closing in on the identity of the suspect in the shooting.
John Tucker, thank you so much. An update there on what we've seen on 6th Avenue here 24 hours ago. We welcome all of you. The tape, a little bit constructively better. I'm going to say there's red and green on the screen, but it's all fragile, waiting for the jobs report tomorrow. I want to make clear here, we're talking to Mr. Jersey. He is in, he took the Sikorsky, right?
I think so. God forbid he takes the train. Like back in the day, he used to come into the city every day. He was a working man back when I
You know, you look work from office, okay? Like it's the first time we've seen him in our studio. What, Nixon was president?
Sure,
Something like that. Ira Jersey joins us this morning. I've already got emails coming in. Talk to him about Aston Villa and Tottenham. And I'm like, please, we'll get to that right now. You wrote an outlook with your team. What's the core theme, the core conviction of where we're going to be next year?
Yeah, so our core conviction is that the long end of the Treasury curve, while it might be volatile in a pretty wide range, is not going to trend either with yields going higher or lower. Reason in large part because of that is because if yields go much higher, so they go to 4 3/4, 5%, you have this captive buyer audience of liability managers who need 5% Treasury yields and will just buy them all day long. Really? So you wind up with
pension funds
pension funds, insurance in particular.
We got to buy
right?
this.
Yeah, you have to buy
Obligation.
them. And on the other side, it doesn't look like the economy is going to be slowing down enough to think that you're going to have a massive rally in treasuries. And even if the Federal Reserve cuts more than is currently priced, sure, we could rally a little bit. We can get down to 3.75%, kind of where we were just in September, this past September. But breaking that would require a proper full-on recession, I think, at this point. And it doesn't seem like that's in the cards anytime in the very near future.
So what's the market pricing in now about the Federal Reserve? What does the market think the Fed will do?
Yeah, so the market's pricing for the Fed to cut 3 more times. So that's actually way less than the dot plot. Right. So we do have a Fed meeting in less than 2 weeks, and the quiet period starts next week, and so we won't get any more Fed speakers to give us a clue about what they're going to do. So that makes tomorrow's report super important for whether or not they cut in December. Market's pricing for basically 75% chance of a cut in December, but it's still only then 50-50 odds of a January, right? So the idea is that the Fed might go slower. You heard Jay Powell talk about it this week. You heard Chris Waller talk about it this week. You heard Mary Daly talk about it this week. They're all saying they want to go slow and cautious. So that means that at some point they're going to skip a meeting. The question is, will it be, at this point, will it be this month or next month before they do it?
So you mentioned the jobs coming up tomorrow, which is a special day on everybody's calendar. 203,000 change in non-farm payrolls. What would be a wacky number for your market when you would be like, oh boy?
Yeah. So I mean, I think if you get something like 250 or 300, which we've seen 250 and 300 prints in the not too distant past, but the revisions were actually upward or unchanged, because we're also expecting 112,000 downward revision from the prior months, I believe.
Yes, we are.
And if that's the case, then if we wind up getting that better number, then we could be off to the races. We're back at 4.5% or nearing that on 10-year treasuries, more than likely.
Bracket the real yield then. I mean, I get the idea we get out to 5% and all the long-term liability people have to match that. Bring it over to the 1.92% 10-year real yield. Is it just linear? It just comes right down with everything else?
Yeah, so the market, and I think most people will be shocked about this, inflation expectations. So if you think about what nominal treasuries are, they're the real yield, Tom, that you were just talking about, plus inflation compensation and what you expect to get from inflation. And CPI is what we use as that measure, because that's what goes into Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS. The real yields have been about 88% of the driver of Treasury moves over the last year and a half. So it's all real yield.
You measure that?
Yeah, I just do like a standard deviation, run a regression, like that kind of thing. Because I'm a nerd. Come on.
The last guy you want to hang out with a cocktail party, Lisa, is these rate guys.
That's probably true. Unless you want to talk soccer. Unless it's a lot of soccer people at the cocktail party, then I'm perfect. But ultimately, a lot of Treasury moves have nothing to do with inflation expectations recently. Inflation expectations, even though people are worried about Trump tariffs and stuff like that, you haven't seen them move very much. They move like 6 basis points. Big deal.
I got to switch. I mean, literally have people emailing me and talk to Ira about soccer. Okay, we're going to do that right now. I think most people don't understand that when you have wealth creation, like Wes Eden's A Fortress, or an Egyptian billionaire, that they can own a minority interest in the New York Rangers and your Aston Villa. With the bond market right now and the bonuses that I'm hearing about, is it going to be even more so? Financial guys buying sports teams?
Well, I would. There's always been some financial folks who have bought sports teams, right? You've always had hedge fund managers and like that have a lot of money and they want to have either a trophy asset or an asset that they think is undervalued and can appreciate. And I think when one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of Americans go into the European soccer football landscape is because they look at the franchise fees and how much the valuations are of American sports teams, and they just say, okay, I can buy something that has similar, revenue and cash
value
flow.
Proposition.
100% a value proposition. Why do you buy? Why did Ryan Reynolds and those guys? Now they're not financial guys, right? They're Hollywood stars. They bought a 5th division football team in England, playing in the English Pyramid, and that team, I bet you, has doubled or tripled in value easily since they bought it.
To me, it's what Barclays has done with NBC. Let's listen.
Halfback passes to the center, back to the wing, back to the center. Center holds it. Holds it. Holds it.
Halfback. Passes to center. Back to wing. Back to center. Center holds it. Holds it. Holds it.
There we go. Ira, that was Aston Villa. You're finally winning a game the other day. Is the magic still on? Is the soccer interest off the Premier League still there in America and growing?
Yeah, it is, and the Premier League obviously is one of the most watched leagues in the United States. Liga MX is still the highest watched in the U.S. Right. But look, we have the New York Red Bulls. I've been a supporter of theirs since 1998. They're in the MLS Cup Finals only for the second time in their history this weekend. The Apple TV deal, I think, has decrease the discoverability of Major League Soccer, but at the same time, the production value of what they do is much better.
20 seconds. Sweeney's going to the Sphere to see the Eagles. Is he going to pay the same amount to see World Cup soccer in your New Jersey here?
He might. I was looking
when is that,
at
26?
It's 2026. The World Cup's coming here. The final will be at MetLife Stadium, so very close. You can get a good ticket for about $33,000 right now.
Oh my God! Are you serious?
I'm serious. Yeah.
$33,000
per ticket. I told my wife that it was $5,000 a ticket. She thought, oh, it's $1,000 a ticket. We can bring all 5 of us, and no.
Folks, all I can say for you billionaires listening, and we really appreciate your interest in what we do. Ira Jersey's commitment to kids soccer is nationally known. You need to buy him $66,000 of World Cup finals for him and Mrs. Jersey. Ira, thank you so much. With Bloomberg Intelligence, with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Prime Minister Michel Barnier presented his resignation to French President Emmanuel Macron. France is facing a political crisis after the parliament voted to bring down the government in a historic no-confidence vote. President Macron is expected to address the French people later today. South Korea's president has replaced his defense minister. Opposition parties moved to impeach both men over the brief imposition of martial law that brought armed troops into Seoul streets. Bloomberg's Katyana Dmitrieva reports from Hong Kong.
The opposition coalition, which includes the Democratic Party there, as well as a few other smaller groups, they are looking to impeach the president because they say he simply broke the law and he went against the Constitution. But they're going to need at least 2/3 of all the government's members to vote in favor of impeachment.
Bloomberg's Katia Dmitrieva reports in order for that to happen, they need at least 8 members of Yoon's party to join them to move impeachment forward. In a rare show of bipartisan agreement, senators from both parties grilled airline executives over so-called junk fees, accusing airlines of shaking down customers. A Senate subcommittee grilling airline executives over the fees charged for early boarding, better seats, and other conveniences, voicing many travelers' frustrations. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal.
They feel, with more than understandable justification, that they are piggy banks to be shaken down by these skyrocketing fees that seem to have no connection to any costs that the airlines incur.
The airline's executives are saying that when adjusted for inflation, airfares, not including the fees, have never been lower. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. I sort of agree with what Michael just said. I look at fees, the fam wants to fly here, fly there. It's really not that bad out there right now.
No, I mean,
but you say every seat's taken.
Yeah, every seat's taken, and I talked to George Ferguson at Bloomberg Intelligence, and I'm like, capacity. Why can't they bring more capacity in? But it's all about managing that load factor, how many people you put in a plane, and what they pay per seat. So it's a delicate game, which I think I don't know. It's a tough game.
Now, folks, the Bloomberg surveillance 12 seconds on Bitcoin. We're up 5.6%, $103,000 for Bitcoin.
Sure, why not?
Lisa, do you want to, you're sliding into this. I mean,
yeah, it's my son buying now.
So, if your son bought at 80,000, that's popping a gain.
60,000 a month ago.
Team coverage in the 10 o'clock hour from New York. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, having a little bit of trouble gaining some traction. This is after hitting multiple all-time highs. Traders getting ready for tomorrow's jobs report. What a rally it was, though. It drove the S&P 500 to its 56th record this year. Checking in with the S&P 500, little change, up about a point at 6,087. The Dow down 0.1%, 50 points, 44,963. The Nasdaq, little change, up 18 points at 19,754. The two-year yield 4.16%. That's up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 4.20%, and that's up 2 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%, and over to Bitcoin up 5% at 103,407. Some good news for a few airlines. You have Southwest. They raised their estimates for unit revenue in the fourth quarter, pointing to what it called resilient travel demand. Its shares are up about 1.5%. And American Airlines up 11%, raised its profit expectations for the final months of the year. And then we go from planes to cars. Now, despite a lot of car buyers second-guessing whether they want to get an EV, there's no doubt over at the Vatican because the Pope Mobile is going electric. That is right, a custom-made, battery-powered, bulletproof Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Of course, the news flow, I mean, is nuts.
Crazy.
We do economics, finance, investment. You'd think it was the Paris show today.
Right.
Francine Lacroix in Conversation Le Pen, Stephen Carroll killing it, Richard Haass helping us out there. A little bit on Korea. Do you remember there's a bond market, all that? Forget about it. The most important news on Bloomberg Surveillance today is Sweeney has tickets for the Eagles at the Sphere. But the difference is, Paul, you used to jet in, you know, you take the Gulfstream out, you go in, you go into Harry Reid International Airport. In the old days, you'd go to 255 Sands Avenue, the Sphere, you'd rent a car. You know, you'd be Avis or Hertz or, you know, if you're trying to save $1, Enterprise. It's gone. In charge of debt, car rentals, in the train wreck known as car rentals. Jody Lurie joins us now, senior credit analyst. Does anybody rent a car anymore?
Actually, Tom, I rented a car last week through Enterprise. Actually, through Costco.
But talk to us about the...
Through Costco?
Through Costco. Costco, I mean, I don't cover Costco. This is not an advertisement for Costco. But I have found, anecdotally, that it's the best rates that I can get. And they guarantee that second driver is always covered, which not every company does.
Do you get like a half dozen hot dogs?
I do. You know, I pick them up. I say, just make sure it's big enough so I can pick up that free grill that they give out.
The free grill. Awesome. So, all right, talk to us about, you cover like all the leisure companies from the credit perspective here. The consumer's spending money, right? Mm-hmm. So broadly defined across your leisure companies, the rental cars, the hotels, the cruise lines. Talk to us, what are your companies saying about the consumer out there?
So it really depends on the company. For the cruise lines, it's still smooth sailing, no pun intended. For the hotels, they definitely have added some cautious optimism to their conversations, particularly in China, particularly in the US. And for rental car companies, it's a little bit more of a toss-up. That's more of a cost issue than a revenue issue for them. People are renting cars. People are also using alternatives to renting cars. Right. But people are renting cars. It's just that the car companies don't seem to understand their cost structures as well, at least certain car companies such as Hertz.
Can you predict issuance for next year? I mean, like you sit there at your desk and go, this is what we're guessing corporate issuance will be?
So I used to do that at my old shop. Now we sort of... I can get a sense of roughly where it's going to be. I think next year is going to be a little bit higher than this year, the function being interest rates, assuming interest rates go down. Obviously, Ira has thoughts on that, which you've heard already. But that said, you know, I think companies are going to look at ways to sort of refinance, kick the can down the road as much as possible, particularly when there's a little bit of economic uncertainty at the moment. As we get into the new administration, as we think about tariffs, as we think about global geoeconomic risk of any kind.
So what do they, how are the balance sheets for the leisure companies that you follow? Because I remember distinctly at the beginning of the pandemic, some of the first issuers were your cruise companies going out there raising debt because they knew that this was going to be bad for their business and they needed cash. How are the balance sheets for some of these leisure companies out there?
So for some of the companies, they've gotten back to pre-pandemic levels and even more so, to the point that they're so comfortable that they're instituting very generous shareholder reward plans. For some of the other companies, it's a little bit more of a turnaround story still. Cruise lines we mentioned, they are still very much in turnaround phase, but they are more like 6th, 7th inning as opposed to, first or second inning. That was 2 years ago. The rental car companies, Hertz is definitely a very distinct company within the space that's having issues. That's sort of company specific.
See, I'm a Hertz Gold customer, so tell me what's going on at Hertz. Am I in trouble here?
Well, Hertz Gold customer, you might still be treated nicely, but the issue with Hertz is they have such a young management team. They've had a revolving door of a management team, and for a company like that, there's such a importance to institutional knowledge that I think. When you look at them versus Avis, when they're dealing with a lot of the same issues, Avis was able to navigate it much more gracefully, or they've been able to, and they continue to do that. We've seen that time and again.
What's a coupon on like a Hertz or Avis piece?
So Hertz actually is tapping the markets again. They're reissuing for it's 12 5/8 of 29.
12%?
And that's for a secured. That's for first lien notes.
That's sick.
For first liens, yeah.
And
you compare that, and then you compare that to the 2026s that they issued shortly after they reemerged from bankruptcy a few years ago. Those are 4 5/8.
Okay, you're Bryn Mawr a few years ago. It's a beautiful spring afternoon. Nobody's focused. Nobody's thinking. And you're in class trying to keep awake, and you're doing M&M theory, Modigliani and Miller theory. Bring M&M theory over to Mag 7. Explain to me and to Paul, who's big on this, why doesn't Mag 7 use debt versus the equity shell game and massive share buybacks?
Well, Tom, I was sort of anticipating.
Why don't they use debt?
Yeah, that's always the question. I personally think that is the stupid game to go if you are giving share buybacks. I think, obviously a lot of companies like to do that. A lot of companies like to bolster their own stock price, especially if you have your own dividends that you're receiving. But at the end of the day, it's problematic when companies do this, and they do this so aggressively, and when they have shareholders that dominate so much of their equity outstanding. You have that with Hertz, you have that with Avis. They both did share buybacks in 2022 when their EBITDA levels were just tremendous, and we knew that was going to be the best they were going to have for quite some time, and that's when they gave back to shareholders. It doesn't make sense to me.
What's the best value in your credit world for the leisure? Do I go out and buy this Hertz piece of paper, or is there something better out there you guys are looking for?
Well, I think Hertz is a particular situation that certain people have a stomach for and other people don't. I think they're at a point where they could make it. Their third quarter results were a little bit better than expected, and I think it's because people had very low expectations. But there's the potential that they could make it through, but there's also the potential it could go a different way. And I think by management tapping the debt markets today and them communicating that they're going to do so on the third call, it was indicative of them saying, we're not fully confident that we have the liquidity to make it through. Now, for some other companies, you talk about Royal Caribbean, they were just recently upgraded, and they're on the cusp of investment grade. Management has been pretty aggressively improving their capital structure and repaying debt.
Joni Lurie, I got 20 seconds. Joni Lurie on Bitcoin. Are you popping this thing? Are you writing at 104,000?
The only thing I will say about Bitcoin is what struck me is when I went to Resorts World a few years ago when they first opened, and they had a machine to access your cryptos to pay for your gambling habits.
Wow, that's what you need, Tom.
Yeah, Resorts World Las Vegas.
Yes.
Joni Lurie, don't be a stranger. Thank you so much. They're on the 12% coupon.
Yeah.
Of Hertz.
That would be nice.
We need to say thank you to our team. They've been working 24/7, particularly John Tucker. Thank you for his continued study of what we're seeing in New York with this shooting. We've been doing Tom Elmhurst music. The British lad, James Bay. Have a great day. Next, Bitcoin, Paul Sweeney, Alex Steele.
I'm a hot mess. I'm thinking things that I stars.